subscribe and click the bell icon to turn on notifications.
We've made the accompanying exercise files for this tutorial available for free. Just click the link below in the video details to get these.
In order to work through this course fully and really get the most out of it, you're going to need to have a working copy of Access 2021 on your PC. So I just wanted to spend this lesson just running through how you can obtain or acquire Access 2021. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I've just opened up Google and I'm going to type in buy Access 2021. And I'm going to jump straight across to the official Microsoft link that says buy Microsoft Access standalone price and license. So let's click on this link to open it up because this is going to give us some important information. So we're basically now on the Microsoft product page for Access. And you can see what we have here are basically two options, two different ways that we can get hold of a copy of Access. Now it might be that you are a Microsoft 365 subscriber. If you are, then you can get Access along with your subscription. And just a side note here, I am in the UK, as you can probably tell by the accent. So all of the prices you're seeing on this site are in UK pounds. This obviously might be slightly different for you depending on your location in the world. Also, you might find that your product page looks slightly different to the one that I'm viewing. But in general, you're going to be able to jump onto the Microsoft website, find the product page for Access, and it's going to have similar information. Now, if you're not somebody who wants to have a monthly subscription to Microsoft 365, you could choose to just download a standalone copy of Access. And the latest version is Access 2021, which is what we're running through in this course. So you can see here some of the high-level differences between Access 2021 and the Microsoft 365 version. When you purchase Access 2021, it's for one PC only. Whereas if you sign up for a Microsoft 365 subscription that includes Access, up to 6 people in your household can use it. You're pretty much going to be able to do everything that you can do in Access 365 in Access 2021 because it is the latest version. However, there might be some of the more collaborative features that you can't use in the standalone version. Now, the advantage of the standalone version is that you just pay one price for it, and that is that. So there's no ongoing monthly cost in order to effectively rent Access from Microsoft. For example, for me, I could pay £149.99, download my copy of Access, and that is mine on my PC to keep forever. So all I would need to do here is click on the Buy Now button, and it's going to take me through to the checkout page, and I can then walk through the instructions to install Access on my PC. So in general, this will be some kind of installation file that will download to your PC. You can double click to run it, and then it's effectively installed. Once it's been installed on your PC, depending on the operating system that you're using, and I'm using Windows 11, we can simply click on the Windows icon, click on All Apps, and we should find that we have Access at the top there in the A section. And if you don't want to keep coming into this page in order to open up Access, you can simply right-click, go to More, and you can choose to pin it to your taskbar. Now, I already have mine pinned, which is why mine is saying unpin. But that's just going to pin it to this bar at the bottom where you can see I have all of my applications, which makes it really simple for me to open up Access. But that's pretty much it. There are other websites that you can purchase Access from. I would say try and make sure that you do download it from a reputable supplier to ensure that you are getting a genuine copy of Access 2021. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at what's new in Access 2021 and really take a look at the main differences between the previous version, Access 2019, and the latest version. And helpfully, Microsoft has a page on its support site that runs through all of those changes. So if we scroll down, we can see them. If you want to learn a bit more about any of these items, you can click on the Learn More link just underneath the paragraph of text. So the first thing we can do is we can add tables with fewer clicks. And what that basically means is when we go into relationships, we now have this Add Tables pane on the right-hand side, which makes it really simple to add additional tables, links, and queries to the Relationships window. We can also keep tabs on our database objects. So this really relates to the new tab structure that we have in Access. So notice every time we open a table or a query or a report, it appears in a tab at the top. We can drag them to rearrange them and click on the cross to close them down. The next new item is that we can refresh, relink, or remove linked tables. And we can do this using the Linked Table Manager. So if we've linked to other tables in other sources, we can manage them all in one place by using the Linked Table Manager. Now, I don't have any external tables linked to my tables in Access, but if you did, you could see them all in there. We also have a brand new data type called Date Time Extended. So when we're adding new fields into our tables, you're going to find that this data type is available for you to use. And it's a bit more comprehensive than the regular date time data type, as it allows you to add longer dates and times. We also have dark theme support now. So if you're somebody who prefers to use a darker theme as opposed to white or colourful, then you can change your office theme to dark grey or maybe black to increase that contrast. And I know a lot of people like this. I'm not one of them, so I'm going to put mine back to how it was. We just access these through File and Account. And I'm going to switch mine back to colourful. The next change is that we do have some improvements to SQL View, particularly when we're searching. So if we open up one of our queries and then switch into SQL View so that we can see the code that sits behind this query, if we do a Control F, we can now find and replace different items within our query code. The next improvement is that we have some changes to the Query Designer. So once again, we're going to go back into our query, but switch into Design View. If we click on any of the tables, notice in that right-click menu, we have three new options. We can open, we can switch to Design View, or we can size to fit. And finally, we're going to pick the perfect color. So if we're working with reports where maybe we have some formatting like we do here, we can jump into Design View and open up the property sheet. And if we want to change the color of any section of this report, what we can now do is we can click on the three dots and go into more colors. And we can now get very granular by using the hex code for the color that we're looking for. It's now time to do exercise 1. And this first exercise of the course isn't essentially an exercise, it's really just to check to make sure that we're setting ourselves up for success. So the first thing I'd like you to do is make sure that you've been through each of the lessons in this section thoroughly and that you have a good understanding of what Access is and why it's useful. The next thing I'd like you to check is that you've downloaded all of the course files and the exercise files and that you have them stored somewhere safe and easily accessible on your PC, because we're going to be diving in and out of these throughout the balance of this course. Now, the next thing should be pretty obvious. If you'd like to run through this course with me, then you need to make sure that you have a working copy of Access 2021 downloaded and installed on your PC. And hopefully by this stage, you already have that. And then finally, just to make it really easy for you to open and close Access, I'd like you to pin Access 2021 to the taskbar. So once you've done all of those things, we should be in good stead to dive into the course. As I said, there's no real answers to this particular exercise, so I'll leave that with you and I'll see you in the next one.
For the next section, you'll want to download the course exercise files. Click the link below in the video description to get these. You can also scroll through the details to find timestamps for each section in this course. If you're enjoying this training, please leave us a comment.
So let's start out by opening up Access 2021, taking a little bit of a first look at the Access interface and mainly focusing on the different database templates that we can use when we're working in Access. Now, currently, I don't have Access open, but it is installed on my PC. So hopefully at this point in the course, you have acquired Access, you've downloaded it onto your machine, and you're at the point where you're ready to really open it up and get going. Now, I'm using Windows 11, so this process that I'm going to walk through now might be slightly different for you, depending on the operating system that you're using. So for me, on Windows 11, when I want to open up a new application, I'm going to drag my mouse all the way down to the bottom of the screen, and then where we have the Windows logo, I'm going to click to open the Start menu. Now from here, I can simply type Access into the search bar, or if I have it pinned below, I can click on the icon just there. Alternatively, I can click on the All Apps button to display all of the apps that I have installed on my PC, and helpfully, because these are in alphabetical order, the top one there is Access. Now, if this is an application that you're going to be using all the time, it might be worth pinning this either to the taskbar or to the Start menu. So if we right click on the application and go to More, this is where we have the pinned taskbar option. So I'm going to pin this application. You can see it's popped up at the end of all of my application icons in the taskbar so that I can easily access this whenever I need to. So let's click to open up Access. Now you're going to be jumped straight to what we call the Start screen. And this is one of those screens that you only ever see the first time that you open Access. You won't see this screen if you have a database open and close it down. It's not going to take you back to this screen. You'll only get this screen if you've closed the entire application and then you relaunch it. And the Start screen is really just a hub from which you can do various different things. So I'm currently clicked on Home. And you can see here we have access to create new blank databases, and we also have some templates up here. And then underneath that, we have a recent and a pinned list. And this works exactly the same as other Microsoft applications you might have already used. In the recent list, we can see the files that we've opened and accessed recently. And the number of files that you can see in this list is very much determined by what you have set in your access options. And we're going to take more of a deeper dive into access options a bit later on. But just be aware you can change how many recent items you are displaying. Now, the pinned list is where we can go to access databases that we've pinned for quick reference. So once again, if I wanted to pin one of these databases, maybe I'm always in and out of the Pegasus Help database, all I need to do here is click on the drawing pin icon to the right, and that's going to pin that database not only to the top of the recent list, but also it's going to put it into this pinned area so it's nice and quick for me to access. If you want to unpin databases, just simply click on that drawing pin again to remove them from the pinned list. So really nice and straightforward to find and access databases that you've recently been using. Now, what else do we have on this page? Well, if we go down to the New section, once again, this is where we can come to create a new blank database, or we can utilize templates. And you can see a full list of all of the templates underneath this search bar just here. Now, if you're not all that familiar with templates, all a template really is a starting point from which to build a database. So instead of just being faced with a blank database and having to build it from scratch, templates contain a lot of pre-built items. So pre-built tables, queries, forms, reports, and they even contain things like formatting. So they give you a really good basis from which to start. And of course, we can modify these templates. We don't have to keep the information that comes with the template. Now, all of the templates are divided down into different categories. For example, you can see here we have business, logs, industry, lists, personal, contacts, so on and so forth. So we could choose to select one of these categories. So if I click on business, it's going to load up all of the templates that are business related. Let's click the back arrow to go back, because if I want to find a very specific template, I can simply search for it. So I'm just going to type in here, let's go for contacts, and press the enter key. It's going to go away and find all of the databases related to storing contacts. Now, if I want to use one of these templates, I can simply click to open. And it's going to load up this little preview window that gives me the name of the template, who it's been provided by, a little bit of a description about this template, and then you can see the default file name underneath. Now, you'll find that when you're creating new databases in Access, they're always given a default file name of something like database 1, database 2, so on and so forth. And they're always going to have that .accdb file extension. That is the file extension for all standard Access files. And then underneath you can see where my file is going to be stored by default. And again, this path here where it's saving is something that we can determine in our Access options. So I've set mine to save into the course files folder for this particular course. If I wanted to change that, I can browse for another location. Now for the time being, I'm just going to leave this as the default file name. So let's click on Create. Now once again, what you'll see a lot of the time is a security warning pop up. And this is just really there to remind you to check the source of this particular file. We don't want to open up something that could contain a virus and be harmful to our PC. Now, I know that this template is from the Microsoft Corporation, so I'm pretty happy that it's not going to contain any nasties, so I'm going to select Enable Content just to get rid of that message. As soon as I do that, it pops up what we call the welcome screen for this database. And welcome screens are actually something that we can create ourselves when we're creating our own databases. So if I wanted to have a welcome screen for all of the users of my database, I could completely customize this with my own message, my own links. I could add my own videos and even use my own logo or branded colors. So welcome screens can be quite useful for giving initial information. Now, when you're actually building your database and you're sort of in and out of files like this, it can be quite annoying for this welcome screen to keep popping up. So we can actually disable it by deselecting this little checkbox in the bottom corner, show welcome when this database is opened. If you deselect that, it's not going to pop this welcome screen up every single time you open. Now, I'm not going to deselect it at the moment. I'm simply going to close the window down. So this is a good example of a database template. Notice that we have the main contact list open up in its own tab at the top here. And we're now in Access working in the main window. Now, in the next lesson, we're going to really start exploring this interface so we understand where things are. And we're going to talk through what we can see in this menu on the left-hand side. So we're going to come back to this. For the time being, let's just close this file down. Now, when it comes to closing databases, we can go up to File and Close, or alternatively, if you like your keyboard shortcuts, you can close a database by pressing Ctrl-W. So now, if we go back into File, notice what's at the top of this recent files list, Database 1. So that is the database that we basically just created with its default file name. So now we are pretty much ready to move on to the next lesson, where we're going to take a closer look at how we can open existing databases, save them, rename them, create new databases, so on and so forth. We'll also take a little bit more of a deeper dive into the Access interface. In the previous lesson, we saw how we could create a brand new database based off of the contacts template. And if you recall, we didn't rename that template, we just left it on the default, which was database1.accdb. And I'm back at the start screen now, and you can see that that database is pinned to the top of my recent list, making it super easy for me to access. So let's start out by reopening this contacts database. All I need to do here is simply double click to reopen. Now remember, with this template, it has a welcome screen that's going to pop up whenever we open this database. So let me just show you a couple of different tricks that you have for disabling this welcome screen pop-up. Now, I did briefly mention the first method previously. We could simply deselect the tick in this box in the bottom left-hand corner. But there is another way that we can do this. So for the time being, I'm just going to close down this welcome screen. And if you take a look in the pane on the left-hand side, right at the top where we have tables, we have a table for settings. Now, if we double click to click on this, notice that we have a column that says Show Welcome. And currently that has a tick in it. So this is basically what's controlling that welcome screen. And if we deselect the tick actually on the welcome screen, it basically just disables the option in here. So what we could do to stop that welcome screen popping up is simply remove the tick from this box. Now also notice that when I double click to open settings, it opened in a new tab. So currently I have the contact list open and I have the settings tab open as well. And you'll notice this if we go through and start double clicking to open other things from this left-hand pane, each one is going to open in its own separate tab. So it keeps things quite nice and organized, and you can have multiple things open at the same time. If you want to close something down, we simply click on the cross on the tab to get rid of it. Now it's asking me, do I want to save the changes? Well, yes, I do. Let's click on yes, and that tab is now closed. So if we go back and now close down the contacts database again, and then jump back in and reopen it, we should find that we no longer get that welcome screen. So 2 methods there for disabling that welcome screen pop-up. Now we're back in our contacts list, let's take a moment just to review what we actually have in this left-hand pane. Because if you're new to Access, then all of this is probably going to look a little bit confusing. Now this pane on the left-hand side is basically where all of the objects that make up our database are stored. So that could be things like different tables to hold our database information, different queries we've created to search our data. Maybe we've created some user forms to make it easy for our users to interrogate the data. Maybe we have some reports that we need to run every week, and we have those set up. Or maybe we also have some macros in here as well. And because this is a template, you can see that it comes with its own tables, its own queries, its own forms, so on and so forth. If we create a blank database from scratch, then this pane is basically going to be empty, and we need to create our own tables, queries, forms, so on and so forth. So just bear that in mind. Obviously, we're going to go into this in a lot more detail in section 2. But just get yourself a little bit familiar with that left-hand pane and the types of information that's held in there. Now, something that I want to do here is I want to rename this file, because if you recall, currently it's simply called database01. So for this, we need to jump up to File and go down to the Save As area. Now I want to save the database, and then I can choose the type of file that I want to save this as. Now I'm just going to save this as the default database format, which is that .accdb file extension. So that's selected by default. Let's click on Save As. And you'll more than likely get this little pop-up message. All open objects must be closed prior to continuing this operation. So basically, all of the tables, all of those little tabs have to be closed before you can save. Now, if you forget to do that, like I do all the time, then you can simply select yes, and Access will close the objects for you. Now, it's going to jump you to your default save folder. And when we get to the lesson related to Access options, I'm going to show you how to set that up. So mine's jumped me to the course files folder, and I'm just going to name this contacts01 and click on Save. And let's click Enable Content, and there we go. Now, one thing you might notice is that even though I've called this Contact01, up in the title bar, it just says Contact Management Database. And that's because we can effectively give our database a name that is different to the actual saved file name. So if we go into File and down to our Access options and jump across to Current Database, this is where that title bar title is controlled. So application title is Contact Management Database. So we can have a different title as opposed to file name. If I wanted to keep things consistent, I could name this Contact01. Click on OK. It tells me I need to close and reopen for this to take effect. I'll click OK again, and it actually does change it. I don't need to close and reopen. So that is a difference between Access and some of the other Microsoft applications that you might have used. Now let's take a moment to talk about closing our files. We've seen how we can close tabs. We can click on the cross to close a tab. If I want to close just the file or just the database that I have open, I can go to File and Close. And that's just going to close the file, but it's going to leave Access open. If I want to close down all of Access, I need to click on the tiny cross in the top right-hand corner. If I click that, it's going to close the actual application. And if I want to reopen, I need to go back down to my taskbar, click on the Access icon, and it's going to reopen that up. Remember, when you reopen, it's going to take you straight to the Start screen, where we can see our recent list, and right at the top we have our file. Now if I want to open a file that I maybe haven't accessed recently, this is where I would go to the Open section just here. And you can see that I've got my OneDrive, I've got SharePoint connected, so I can browse either of these to open a file, or maybe I have an Access database saved onto my desktops or into my documents. I could click on Browse from here and navigate to it that way. Also notice on the right-hand side of this particular open area, we have something very similar. Here we can see all of our recently accessed files and our pin files, and we can also see the folders that we last used as well. So you have a multitude of different ways that you can find and open existing files. Now, the final thing we're going to do before we leave this lesson and move on to the next one is that we're going to create the new blank database that we're going to be working on throughout the balance of this course. So if you want to create a new blank database, we can do this from Home or New. Let's go into New. The first option we have here is blank database, which is effectively still a template. It's just got nothing in it. Now, this time I am going to name my file because I don't want it called database 2. I'm going to call this Global Tech Help Desk and click on Create. So you can see the difference here between the blank and the pre-populated template. If we take a look at the menu on the left-hand side, we don't really have anything in there other than Table 1. And Table 1 currently has nothing in it. Another thing that's different is take a look up in the title bar. We have this really, really long, ugly file name. And that's because it's including the entire file path in that title area. So the first thing I would do here is I would go in and make sure that I change this. So we saw how to do this. We go to File, we go down to Options and Current Database, and we can put whatever application title we like. So I'm going to call this Global Tech Help Desk, click on OK, and that now looks a lot neater. So we're really at the stage now where we need to start populating our database with information and tables and all of that good stuff. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. We're going to be doing that in section 2. Throughout the rest of this section, we're really just going to explore the actual interface. We're going to talk about the different commands. I'm going to show you some useful customizations, and we're really just going to get ourselves familiar with moving around and working in the Access interface. Let's dive a little bit deeper into the Access interface and really start to understand where different commands are located and all of the different parts that make up Access as a whole. Now, if you recall, in the last lesson, we finished up by saving our new blank database and we called it Global Tech Help Desk. Now we're going to come back to this because it is what we're going to be working on throughout the balance of this course. But for the time being, just to help us explore the interface in a little bit more detail, we're going to close down this file by going up to the File tab and choosing Close. And we're going to reopen, so let's go to File and Open, the contacts database that we were looking at before. Now from this screen, I can go straight over to the right-hand side where we have files, and because it is a file that I accessed earlier on today, I should find it listed underneath this Today group. So let's click to reopen. And there we go. Again, we didn't get that welcome screen, which is great. So let's start out right at the top here. We have our title bar running across the top. Remember, you can change that title by changing the application title in Access Options. We've seen how to do that a couple of times. Now, underneath the title bar, this is where we have what we refer to as our ribbons. If you're completely new to Microsoft products, then this will be terminology that you're probably not familiar with. And these ribbons are just these horizontal areas that run across the top that house all of our commands. And each ribbon has its own tab. You can see here we have Home, Create, External Data, Database Tools, so on and so forth. So each tab has its own ribbon and each ribbon has its own commands. And all of the commands that you see on these ribbons, and we'll just use the Home ribbon as an example, are kind of sorted and categorized into different groups. So we have the Views group, the Clipboard group, the Sort and Filter group, Records, Find, Text Formatting. And the idea of this is really just to make it a little bit easier for you to find exactly the command that you're looking for. Because you'll find in Microsoft applications there are so many commands and it can be a little bit overwhelming if you are new to the application. Now notice that as I'm clicked on Home, a lot of these commands in these different groups are showing in a lighter grey colour, which means I can't actually click on them, they're not accessible. So you'll see commands grey out or become active depending on where you're clicked in your database. If it's greyed out, it means it's not a command that's available to you whilst you're clicked in the current area. Notice that if I come down to my contact list and just click in first name, you can see that some of these become active. So just be aware of that. Not all commands are available at all times. Now, something else that you'll find on these ribbons is that in some of these groups, you can see this small little diagonal arrow in the bottom right-hand corner. And this in general means that you can click on it and it's going to open up more options related to that particular group of commands. For example, if we take a look at this text formatting group on the end here, this is where we would come to change things like our font color, our font size, make things bold, alignment tools, that type of thing. If I click on the little diagonal arrow in the corner, it's going to open up this datasheet formatting dialog box where I can go in and I can start to make customizations to the way that my datasheet looks using some additional tools which aren't necessarily available when we're just looking at the ribbon. So these little diagonal arrows will normally have more options related to that specific group, in this case, formatting. Another thing that we have that you can't see at the moment is something called contextual ribbons. And these are ribbons, much like the ribbons you can see up here, but they only appear when they're needed. And you're going to see a lot of examples of this as we work through this course. So I'll speak more about that when we get to a contextual ribbon. Underneath the ribbons, we have the quick access toolbar. And that's this tiny little toolbar that you can see over on the right-hand side. Now, currently, my quick access toolbar doesn't contain too many things. Currently, it just has save, undo, and redo. And the quick access toolbar is really just a quick way to access commands that you use frequently. And we can completely customize this quick access toolbar, or QAT as it's more commonly known, so that it works for us. Now, I'm not going to go into this in too much more detail because we do have an entire lesson dedicated to customizing this, because it is a really great efficiency utility when you're working in Access. But just be aware that that is where the quick access toolbar is located. If you can't see it there underneath your ribbons, you might find it above your ribbons up in this title bar area. Now, what else do we have on this interface? Well, we have our left-hand menu where we can navigate between our different objects within our database. And I did speak briefly about this in the last lesson. This is where we come when we want to work on or open any tables that hold our database information. It's where we come to open any queries, take a look at forms, reports, and macros. So every time we create something in our database, we're going to see it in this left-hand menu. And helpfully, the different things that we create are divided down into categories. So it's really easy to see which ones are the tables, which ones are queries, which ones are forms. Currently, I have contact list open, and contact list is a form. If I double click on contacts, this is a table. It's going to open it in a new tab. Now, this is a template that we haven't added anything into, so the table is empty. It doesn't have any information, but we do have the column headings already set up, again, because we're using a template. Remember, when you're working from a blank, as we're going to be doing in the main example in this course, none of these column headings are going to be set up. We need to do them ourselves from scratch. Now, with this little left-hand menu, we can collapse up our groups by clicking on these arrows. And that's quite helpful once we start to have lots and lots of different objects listed down here, because it really enables us just to zero in on what we're interested in. We can also search for different things in our list. Now, currently, I only have a very short list. It's not too difficult to find what I'm looking for. But as I said, if you've got a much larger database, then this left-hand menu is going to be pretty long. We might have 50 different tables and maybe 20 queries and 35 reports. So we need to have a quick way of finding exactly what we're looking for. And that's basically what this little search bar does. If I was to type in something like settings at the top there, it's going to jump me straight to the settings table. To clear the search, I just need to click on the little filter button just here. Also with this little pane, if we click the drop-down arrow, we can choose how we want to sort the items in this list. So I'm currently showing all Access objects in the database, and I'm sorting them by object type, which is why they're categorized into these different groups. And in general, that's how I like to have them ordered. But if you would prefer to have them by created date, you could do something like that. Or maybe tables and related views, you could order them in that way. As I said, my preference is by object type. We can also click on this little left-facing arrow to close up or minimize this navigation pane. And that just gives us a little bit more real estate to work with when we're inputting data. If you want to expand it back out again, just click on the arrow again to bring that back. so really simple to use. Now, obviously, the main part of this interface is going to hold whatever we've opened from this navigation pane. So currently that is holding a blank contacts table. If we click on the cross and close it down, it's going to take me back to my contact list form. And then right at the bottom, we have the status bar. Now, currently my status bar doesn't contain a great deal of information, but if we right click, this is where we can make customizations. So I've got most of my options here with a tick next to them, which means I'm going to get a little indicator in the status bar when it's needed. For example, if I was to turn on the caps lock on my keyboard, you can see over on the right hand side, it's now giving me a little indication that I actually have caps lock on. If I press it again to turn it off, that disappears. So this helps us display different pieces of information that can be quite helpful down in that status bar. So you can go through and you can customize exactly what you want to see. The other thing that we have down in the bottom corner here is a quick way to switch between different views. Now, currently I have a form open, the contact list form. So I'm currently viewing this in form view, but I could switch to layout view, or I could switch to design view. And notice when I switch to design view, this allows me sort of behind the form. And this is where I can come to make any design changes. If I want to change the colors, if I want to change the fields that I'm using, we would do that from design view. And this is kind of setting you up to understand a really important concept when you're working in Access. And that is switching between the different views in order to do different things. So we've seen how we can switch between different views for our form. If I double click to reopen the contacts table, I can switch between different views for this as well. Now, another way that you can switch between views is to simply right click and I can toggle between design view or datasheet view. Datasheet view is what I'm currently in. You can see the grey box around the outside, but I could switch across to design view as well. Now, we're not going to do that right this second. As I said, we're going to be doing this a lot in the following lessons. Just be aware about this concept of switching between different views in order to do different things. It's also worth noting that you can switch views from the home ribbon. The first group is the views group. We can switch between datasheet view and design view. When we're working in a form as opposed to a table, we can switch between form view, layout view, and design view. Final couple of points to mention with regards to the interface. In the top right hand corner, we have all of the usual icons you would expect to see in a Microsoft application. We can minimize the window, we can maximize it, and we can close it from here. We can also jump into our account information from up here as well. And the very final thing to mention is the Backstage area. We access the Backstage by clicking on File. So File is a little bit different to these other tabs because these ones contain commands, whereas when we click on File, it opens up this menu. And the Backstage area is really where we come to do sort of the admin side of our database. It's where we come to create new files. We've seen this previously, where we come to open, save, save as, print, and close. We also have access to our account settings and also access options, which we're going to delve into in much more detail in a later lesson. So that's pretty much a whistle-stop tour of the Access interface. Hopefully now you feel a little bit more comfortable with what you're looking at and how you can find specific things. In the last lesson, we took a quick whiz around the Access interface, and during that lesson, we briefly mentioned the Quick Access toolbar. So in this lesson, we're going to explore that Quick Access toolbar in a little bit more detail, and we're going to show you how you can customize it to make yourself more efficient when you're working with your databases. So let's just recap as to exactly what the Quick Access toolbar is. You may sometimes hear it referred to as the QAT for short. And it's this little toolbar that we have underneath the ribbons. Currently mine is fairly bare. I just have 3 icons on it: save, undo, and redo. Now I mentioned that you might not be able to see this Quick Access toolbar in exactly the same location as mine is here. Now, if that is the case, it might be that you have it up here in the title bar, because you can choose if you want to have this Quick Access toolbar underneath your ribbons or above your ribbons. Notice next to it we have a little drop down arrow, and right at the bottom I could choose to show this above the ribbons. And you can see that kind of places it out of the way up in that title bar area. Now, it's entirely up to you where you choose to have this quick access toolbar placed. I actually prefer it under my ribbons because I tend to forget it's there if it's sort of tucked in the top hand corner. But again, this is very much personal preference. Now, what we can do with this is we can add whatever command we like in access to this quick access toolbar so that next time we need to use it, we're not there hunting through the different ribbons trying to find it. We can also add commands that we can't necessarily see currently on these ribbons. Because we have hidden contextual ribbons and we have other menus and commands available in Access which don't have their own little icon on these ribbons. So we can add anything to our QAT. Now, if we click the drop down again, notice that we have a few different customization options in this menu. Now, the ones that currently have a tick next to them are the ones that are currently showing on the quick access toolbar, but I do have some other commonly used commands that I can quickly add with the click of one button. So I could add new, I could click again, maybe add print preview, maybe I want to add spelling, so on and so forth. And you can see it adds them all here as a little icon. If I want to do a spell check, I can just click it. I don't have to jump across to any other ribbon searching for my spell check options. So it's a nice way of being more efficient. Now, what if I want to add commands to the quick access toolbar, which I can't see in this very short list? Well, we can pretty much add anything that we can see on any ribbon. For example, if I go to the Create ribbon, maybe I'm always creating tables. So what I can do here is hover my mouse over where we have Table, right-click, and choose Add to Quick Access Toolbar. And that's going to add that table option. And I could go through adding the commands that I use frequently to my Quick Access Toolbar to make things really nice and simple. So if you can see the icon, you can right click and you can add it. And if I want to add something that I can't see on a ribbon, maybe it's contained on a contextual ribbon that I can't currently see, we can click the drop down and we can go into more commands. And this basically jumps us across to our access options and to the quick access toolbar page. On the right hand side, we can see a big long list of all of the commands that we currently have on the quick access toolbar. And on the left hand side, we have lists of other commands that we can add. And these are all categorized. So currently I'm displaying just the popular commands. If I click this drop down arrow, I could choose to show all commands available in Access. And these are arranged in alphabetical order to make things a little bit easier to find. So I could go through this list and I could start to pick out the commands that I want to add to that QAT. So maybe I want to add some alignment options. I'm going to go for align bottom. I'm going to click the add button in the middle to move that across. Let's go for align left and also align right. Let's add both of those. If you want to remove anything from the quick access toolbar, for example, print preview, just select it and do the opposite. Click remove. I'm also going to remove new from there as well. And you can rearrange the items, the order of the items on your quick access toolbar by using the up and down arrows just here. So maybe I want my alignment tools right at the bottom so I can select them and I can just simply use these buttons to move them into the correct position. So let's put all of those at the end. Now, something else I can do to give my quick access toolbar a little bit of structure is I could add separators to effectively group together commands of similar type. Now, you'll find separators in every single list. So if I scroll to the top of all commands, there is a separator. But if I was in popular commands, I'll find it at the top of that list as well. So maybe I want to add in 3 separators. Make sure I have it selected. Click the add button 3 times. 1, 2, 3. And these are little lines that we can place on our quick access toolbar to group things together and give it a little bit more structure. So I'm going to grab this separator and I'm going to move it up to there. I'm going to grab this one and I'm going to put it there. I'm going to grab this one and I'm going to put it, let's put it just there, I think. So now when I click on OK, I should find that I have a completely reordered quick access toolbar. And all of those different groups have that very light grey separator in between them just to give it a little bit of structure. So that is the quick access toolbar and how you can customize it and make yourself more efficient by adding to it commands that you use frequently. Ensuring that you know where to go to access the different types of menus in your database is really important and a fundamental skill when you're learning Access. So I just wanted to take a brief moment just to run through the different types of menu that exist within the application and in what type of situations you're going to see these menus. Now let's focus on the commands that we have on the ribbons for the time being. And if any of you are as old as I am, then you'll remember what the Microsoft applications looked like in the pre-ribbon days. Everything was very menu driven. Instead of having commands horizontally on ribbons, we would click on a toolbar and it would show us a drop-down menu. Now we no longer have that style of menu system within the Microsoft applications, but we do still have menus that contain commands that we can execute. For example, if we take a look on the home ribbon, if you ever see any command that has a little arrow next to it, then that means there is some kind of menu or more options lurking underneath. For example, in the first group here we have View and it has a little arrow. If I click it, it shows me a menu which allows me to switch between different views. If I click the lower half of the Paste button, I have different paste options in this menu. If I click the Selection button, that one also has a drop down and it opens up a menu with a couple of additional options. Now, some of these buttons we refer to as a split button, and the Paste button is a really good example. Notice as I hover over the top half, that highlights in grey. If I move my mouse down, it highlights the lower half. So if I click on the lower half of the button, I'm going to get a menu. If I click on the upper half of this button, and I'm not going to do it because I don't want to paste anything, it's basically just going to perform the default functionality for this button. So in this case, it's going to do a default paste, which is just like doing a Control V. The lower half will show me different ways that I can paste. So just be aware of that with these split buttons. We have the same situation here with views. If I click the top half, it's going to show me the default view, which in this case is layout view. If I want anything else, I need to switch to it by clicking on the lower half. Now we've already mentioned the little hidden dialog boxes that you can find underneath the diagonal arrows. And in Access, we don't have too many of them. We actually only have two, one in the clipboard group and one in the text formatting group. If we click them, it opens up a dialog box with more options. So these aren't really menus, but again, it is worth being aware of them. Now, what other menus do we have? Well, we have something called contextual menus. Now, contextual menus can be accessed by right-clicking with your mouse. And the menu that you see is very much contextual or dependent on wherever you've clicked. So if I go to this contact list and maybe I want to start typing in a name, if I right-click my mouse, I get this contextual menu. So this is contextual to what I'm trying to do at the moment. So I'm only seeing the options which are relevant to what I might want to do in this column. I can paste, I can sort A to Z, I can apply a text filter, so on and so forth. If I was to click elsewhere in this form, so maybe if I hover my mouse over the open link and right click, I get a much smaller menu. So all I can do here is really copy this link. If I was to right click on Add from Outlook, I get a completely different contextual menu with different options. So this very much changes depending on where you're currently clicked. And the final thing worth pointing out, because I have mentioned it a couple of times, is that we also have contextual ribbons. And these are ribbons that don't display until they're needed. So, for example, let's open up the contacts table by double-clicking to open that in a new tab. As soon as I open that up, I get two new contextual ribbons, Table Fields and Table. And that's because Access has recognized that I've opened a brand new table and it presents me with all of the options that I have related to tables. So I have a Table Fields ribbon and I also have a table ribbon just here. If I click back on the Contact List tab, which is a form, those table field contextual menus disappear because I'm now working in a form and those tabs aren't relevant. So contextual ribbons contain more options that are contextual to whatever you have open. So just remember that as well. Let's click to close down the contacts table. So those are really all of the Access menu systems that you need to be aware of when you're working with your database. When we're working in Access, we want to make sure that we're working as efficiently as possible. And for a lot of people, efficiency means keyboard shortcuts. Keyboard shortcuts allow us to execute a couple of letters on the keyboard in order to perform an action. And a lot of the time, it's a lot quicker than using your mouse to click through the ribbons to find the command that you're looking for. Now, there are so many different shortcut keys that we can use. And I will say that if you're used to using specific keyboard shortcuts in other Microsoft applications, for example, something like Excel, then a lot of them are the same in Access. So I mean things like Control-C to copy, Control-V to paste, Control-S to save. All of those types of things are the same in Access. Now, there are some differences. We have different shortcut keys assigned to commands that are specific to Access only. And if we want to find the keyboard shortcut for a specific command, there are a couple of ways that we can do this. Now, first of all, if I hover over, let's hover over the Save button in the Records group just here. So this is where I can come to save a specific record once I've made changes to it. And notice as I hover over, I get what we call a key tip. It's telling me the name of the command, save, but it's also showing me in brackets what the keyboard shortcut is to execute that command. So for this specific one, instead of clicking on the save icon, I can simply press Shift-Enter to save the record. What about if I hover my mouse over spelling? Again, you can see that command name and you can see the shortcut key for spelling is F7. So if I press the F7 key on my keyboard, it's telling me my spell check is complete. And that's really because I don't have any information in this database, but it has executed that spell check in order to give me this message. What about if I hover over paste? Again, we have the keyboard shortcut in brackets. And also notice that with some of these commands, we get a description as well, which can be really useful if you're not sure what a particular command does. So it's telling me that if I click this button, it's going to add content on the clipboard to the document, effectively doing a paste. Now you can control what you're seeing in these little screen tips that pop up. And again, we can find this underneath File and Options. On the General tab, you can see here in the User Interface Options group, it says Screen Tip Style. So currently I'm showing the feature descriptions in the screen tips, which is why I can see a little bit of information about what that command does. If I click the drop down, I could choose to not show them, or I could choose to not show screen tips at all. So this is entirely up to you and how you want to customize this. I also get a choice as to if I want to show those shortcut keys in the screen tips. Now in general, I show both descriptions and shortcut keys because I find them to be really useful. So don't forget, hovering over is going to show you the keyboard shortcut if there is one assigned. Now what about if we just want to see a big long list of all of the keyboard shortcuts available in Access? Well, this is where we can jump into the help files and see all of the keyboard shortcuts. So what I'm going to do is right at the top here, we have this little bar that says, tell me what you want to do. Now I'm going to click in here and I'm simply going to type keyboard shortcuts. Now notice underneath it says get help on keyboard shortcuts, 7 results. If I click this little arrow, it's going to pop out some options on the right hand side. So the first one is to show all keyboard shortcuts in Office. That could be pretty useful. I want to see the keyboard shortcuts that are specific to Access. So I can select this second option and it's going to open up the help pane on the right hand side and jump me to the correct area. So if we scroll down, it's always worth reading through some of this information, but you can see that the keyboard shortcuts are divided down into different categories depending on what you're trying to do. So if we just explore the first category, frequently used shortcuts, and click on this link, this is going to show us a table that contains all of the specific keyboard shortcuts. For example, to go to the Home tab, Alt-H. To show or hide the navigation pane, F11. To switch to Form View from the form in Design View, F5. So these are very specific to the Access application. And we can scroll back up and have a little look through all of these different topics, all of these different categories. And in general, when it comes to keyboard shortcuts, I would say there's probably going to be 10 to 15 that you use all the time. And it's definitely good to memorize those because it's going to make you a lot more efficient when you're working with your Access databases. Now we can just simply close down this help pane because the final thing I want to talk to you about are Alt key shortcuts. Now you access your Alt key shortcuts by pressing the Alt key on your keyboard. And notice what happens as soon as I do that. I get letters and numbers appear on various different commands on my ribbon. So if I want to jump to the Create tab, I can press C on my keyboard. Once I'm on that Create tab, I then get a whole new list of Alt key shortcuts. So if I want to create a new table, I can press TN. Let's try it out, TN. And there we go. I haven't had to use my mouse at all. So when you press the Alt key, you're going to get those little shortcut keys. If I press the Alt again, it gets rid of them. And this is what you'll see in a lot of videos, particularly if you watch a lot of videos on an application like TikTok, where the videos are very fast. A lot of people who train Excel and other applications on there will use these Alt key shortcuts to move quickly through the commands. So again, these can be super useful. When you're working with an Access database, it's important to know where you can go to get help if you need it at any point in time. And in Access, we do have a couple of different ways that we can get some help on whatever it is that we're trying to do. Now, we've already seen a couple of them, but not in the context of actual help files. So let's explore this in a bit more detail. Now, the first most obvious way that you can get help in Access is to go to the Help menu. And on this dedicated Help ribbon, you can see we have 4 different options. Now, the first option just here, we can also access by pressing the F1 key on our keyboard. That's a fairly standard thing across all of the Microsoft applications. F1 will take you to the help files. So if we press F1 or click on this icon, it's going to open up this pane on the right hand side where we can access all of the help files by topic. Now, by default, you're going to get this pane that's kind of docked onto the right hand side of the screen. If you want to give yourself a little bit more room, you can click in this header area until you see the double-headed arrow, drag this out, and it will allow you to expand this so it's a little bit bigger. Now, if we click on the Get Started section, this is going to take you through some of the most basic tasks in Access. So for example, how to create a database. You can see here we have a video. If we scroll down, we then have step-by-step instructions which will walk you through this process. So this can be really useful, particularly if you're a beginner using Access. So we can go through some of the most basic tasks. Let's click the arrow to go back. If I want to find out more information about tables, I can expand the tables group. Maybe I'm not sure how to even create a table. Well, we have a link for that just here. We can click on it. And once again, it's going to take us into some step-by-step instructions. So these help files are a really useful reference point. Now, it's worth noting that we can also access these help files by using the Tell Me What You Want to Do bar at the top. And this is what we used in the previous lesson when we were searching for help files on keyboard shortcuts. Now, speaking of keyboard shortcuts, if you're clicked down here in one of your forms or maybe in a table and you want to quickly jump up to this Tell Me box at the top, there is a keyboard shortcut for that of Alt-Q. It's going to pull the focus of your cursor up to that specific area. And here we can type something in that we want to find out more about. So I could go to Create a Table. Now, if I type in create a table, it's going to give me some actions and also access to the help files. So this really depends on what your goal is here. If you just want to read up a little bit more about tables, it's probably better to go to the help files and browse through the different sections. Whereas if you're actually wanting to create a table, this is where we would go to actions. If I click this, it's going to basically execute the action of creating a new blank table. And you can see it's done that just below. Now I'm going to click to close out of this. So just be aware of that. Whatever you type in up here, you might see some actions, and you also might have access to the help files from there. And we've already seen how you can quickly find out what a command does simply by hovering the mouse over it. And if you have descriptions turned on, if there is a description for this command, you're going to see that in the screen tip. Now, it is worth noting here that in Access, a lot of the commands don't actually have a description. If I hover my mouse over, let's say totals, for example, I just get the title in the screen tip. I don't see the keyboard shortcut and I don't see a description. So just be aware of that. I found that in Access, we have less descriptions than maybe we have in other Microsoft applications. But for the ones that we do, it can be really useful to give you a quick idea as to what this command is going to do before you click on it. Now, if we jump back to the Help ribbon for 1 second, aside from help, we have 3 other options. We have a contact support option. So this allows you to get help from an office support agent. Now, this will open up a little window where we can type in a question and click on the Get Help button. So that's a way of contacting support. Now, I've never used that option, so I don't know how long it takes or what actually happens, and I'm going to assume that this is probably more useful if you are located in the US. We also have a feedback button, which allows us to just let Microsoft know if we particularly like something or don't like something, or even if we have a suggestion. Feedback can be really useful to Microsoft when it comes to developing new commands and facilities in the applications. And then finally, we have the Show Training button. And this is a series of different training videos, much like the one that you're watching now, that talk you through different parts of Access. So for example, create an Access database. I could click on this. It's going to give me some information. And in this case, quite a lot of information. And normally in these files, you get some kind of video. So if we go to Add Tables, let's try that one. Yes, there we go. We have a video and then we have some instructions. So all of these resources together give you numerous different ways that you can get help if you're stuck. And of course, if worst comes to worst, we can always jump onto Google and see if anyone out on the internet can help us with our query. But those are the options that you have available within Access. Make sure you're familiar with where they are and how to use them. In the final lesson of this introductory section, we're going to just dive into Access options and take a look at some of the settings. Because it is really important to make sure that you are set up for success before you even begin. Now, we've been into Access options a couple of times already when we've been adjusting little settings. But now let's take a more thorough look through each section in options. So I'm going to jump up to the File tab and we're going to click on Options right at the bottom. Now, Access options is divided down into different sections. You can see the different pages on the left-hand side. Let's start with General. I'm not going to go through every single option that we have in here, otherwise this would be an extremely long video. So I'll just highlight the ones which are worth reviewing and changing if necessary. Now, we spoke a little bit about these user interface options. This is where we can come to change the screen tip style and specify if we want to see descriptions and shortcut keys in those screen tips. Now, another little option that I mentioned right at the beginning of this section is the default database folder. So you can see here, this is where we can define where we want all of our Access database files that we create to be stored. And this is really useful to have this in here because it just means that every time you save a database, you don't have to navigate to the folder in File Explorer. It will jump to that folder automatically. So I'm pretty much saving everything into the Access 2021 for Beginners course files folder. So click on Browse and you can choose exactly where you want your course files to be saved and it will save there by default. Let's now jump across to the current database page. Once again, we have been in here. This is where we come if we need to change the application title. Remember, if you have a really long, messy looking title, which includes the path name, when you save an Access database, just come in here and give it a much shorter application title to make it look a lot neater. Now, most of these options in general, I'll keep on the default settings. And if we come a bit further down to the navigation area, this is where we can choose if we want to display the navigation pane or not. Now, the navigation pane is where you come to access all of your tables, queries, forms, reports, and macros. So in general, I would always keep this turned on, but you do have some other navigation options in here where you can come in and you can do things like change the order of the different categories. So that might be something that you want to do. If we jump across to Datasheet, this is where we can come if we want to customize things like the grid lines that we see in our databases. We can choose if we want both horizontal and vertical grid lines. We can choose a cell effect if we want. I like to keep mine on flat, but you could have raised or sunken. And we can also choose a default column width for our columns. And I'm just going to leave this on this because in general, I will manually adjust the columns if there isn't enough room. And then we've got the default font size, which for me is 11, and the weight is normal as opposed to bold. Now, if we jump across to the Object Designers page, this is where we can change the default settings for the design of database objects. Now in the top here, when we're working in table design view, and we haven't really talked about different views all that much at this stage, so things like data types probably aren't going to mean a lot to you. But this is where we can come to change things like the default field type when we start adding in fields into our tables. So mine is set to short text, and you will see that in action when we create a new table in the next section. and start adding columns, we need to give those columns a data type, and mine by default is set to short text. We also have some other defaults for our field properties, and again, this will make a little bit more sense once we've been through the section on creating tables. If we jump across to proofing, this is where we can set up any autocorrect options that we might want to have. And again, if you've used an application like Excel or Word or PowerPoint, these are pretty much exactly the same. And we do already have some autocorrect options in here by default. For example, if I was to type bracket C bracket, it's going to convert it or autocorrect it to a copyright symbol. Things like that. And you can add your own into here if you so desire. Let's jump across to language. Always want to make sure that the language you're using is your preferred language. It should pick up your language from your PC settings, but if you're like me and you have to switch to a different language, like I tend to work in English United States as opposed to English United Kingdom, where I'm actually from, because most of my clients are in the US. So I want to make sure that my spelling and my date format is in US format. So just come in here and make sure you check those settings. If we go to client settings, this is where we can really adjust the behavior when we're entering and editing in our tables and forms. So for example, when I press the enter key, it's going to move on to the next field by default. If I press the arrow key, it's going to go to the next field, so on and so forth. And as I said, I will probably leave most of these on the default settings, but if you're finding any problems with that or you don't like the way it's behaving, just remember that you can come in here and start to customize these. Now, if we go a bit further down to the display group, this shows me something again, which we were talking about a bit earlier. When we were taking a look at our recent list, in the Backstage area, I showed you that you can customize the amount of recent databases that you're seeing in that list. So mine is set to 50. I could take this down and I'm going to move that down to 20 recent documents. I can also show 50 unpinned recent folders. So I'm going to take that down to 20 as well. Now the customize ribbon area, this is where we can come to effectively customize what commands we're seeing on our ribbons. Now, it might be that if you work at an organization, this area is completely locked down. A lot of the time, IT departments at companies don't like you really messing around with the standard company ribbons and adding your own commands to them. So you might find that you don't have access to do this, but for anybody else, you could come in here and really switch up the commands that you're seeing on each of the ribbons. For example, the home ribbon, the create ribbon, so on and so forth. You can even create your own custom ribbons from here as well. Now that is pretty much outside the scope of this beginner's course, but just be aware that it is a possibility. The next page we've already seen, it's where we come to customize our quick access toolbar. We then have an add-ins page. Currently, I don't have any add-ins in my access, and we're not going to need any for this course. And then finally, we have the Trust Center area where we can review our Trust Center settings. And this is really related to the security surrounding the files that you open in Access. For example, you might want to review your macro settings so that if somebody sends you a database that contains a macro, you can't just simply open it without some kind of warning popping up that it does contain a macro. Because remember, many times viruses can get onto your machine via malicious code within macros. So I generally tend to have mine set to disable all macros with notification, and then I can pick and choose which ones I want to enable. And the message bar, we've seen that in action as well. When I open this file, we get that yellow security warning running across the top. So this is going to pop up whenever Access recognizes that the database you've just opened contains certain things. So that might be macros, it might be ActiveX controls, so on and so forth, any blocked content. So I always find that really useful, just so I know what I'm dealing with. Now, most of these settings are fine out of the box, but just be aware that you can jump in there and review them at any point in time. So those are pretty much all of the options that we have within Access Options. Make sure you review and make the necessary modifications. It's now time for us to do exercise 2. And in this exercise, we're going to practice some of the skills that we've learned in this section of the course. So the first thing I'd like you to do is, using a template, I'd like you to create an inventory database. And I'd like you to save that database as inventory_database.actdb. I'd then like you just to practice opening and closing the database. And I don't really mind what methods you use for this. You might use keyboard shortcuts, or you might open from the recent files list. The choice is entirely yours. Just make sure you're comfortable with opening and closing. I'd then like you to add the following commands to the quick access toolbar: relationships, form wizard, and table design. And of course, if there are any other commands that you feel like adding to that toolbar, then please feel free to do that. So that's it for exercise 2. It's pretty straightforward. If you'd like to see my answer, then please keep watching. So the first thing I asked you to do was to open the inventory template. So we're going to jump straight across to new. There are a few different ways that you can do this, but we're going to click on new. And then in the search for online templates bar, we're simply going to search for inventory. And I don't mind which one of these templates you use, so I'm just going to select this one just here. And we're going to give it a file name of inventory_database. And remember, underneath, that's where your file is going to be stored. So if you want to store it somewhere else, you could click on the folder icon, and that's going to allow you to browse to a specific folder to save it into. So I'm going to click cancel. Let's click on create to create our database based off of this template. So now we have our inventory template open. Again, if you take a look in the title bar, it says inventory_database, which is what we named it. But remember, we have the full path name in here. Now, I didn't actually ask you to do this in the exercise, but if you wanted to, you could have gone into File and down into Options. And then if you flick across to Current Database, this is where you can add in your application title. So just to make this a bit neater, I'm actually going to type in inventory_database and click on OK. The next thing I asked you to do was just to simply practice opening and closing this database. So we could use our keyboard shortcuts, or we could jump up to the File menu and click on Close, which is going to close the database only. Remember, that option doesn't close down all of Access. If we want to reopen, we can press the keyboard shortcut Control-O, which is going to jump us across to that open screen, and then we can select it underneath our recent files. And then the final thing I asked you to do was simply to customize the quick access toolbar. So mine's up here at the top, so I'm going to click the drop down, and I'm actually going to show it below the ribbon. And I asked you to add to it the relationships command. So let's right click, add to quick access toolbar. I asked you to add the table design commands. Let's right click and add. And I also asked you to add the form wizard. So once again, right click and add to quick access toolbar. That's it. That's all I need you to do. I will see you in the next exercise. Tables are undeniably the backbone of Access. Information is stored in one or numerous tables and organized into columns, known in Access as fields, and rows, which are referred to as records. So in Access, we need to create the tables that we need to hold the data. And these tables really form the foundation of everything that comes afterwards. And with these different tables, we can link them together to create relationships. And then we can interrogate that data using queries and reports. So let's look at a basic table. Now we're just going to reopen the file that we're going to be working on throughout the balance of this course. So let's jump to File, and I can see it in my recent list. It's this one just here, Global Tech Help Desk. Let's click to reopen. I'm getting a security warning. That's fine. I can click on Enable Content just to get rid of that. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a database for an IT help desk. So effectively a call logging and tracking system. And we're going to be using a few different tables in order to do that. So we need to really start out by thinking about the types of information that we might want to hold in those tables. For example, I might need a table that holds the actual call information. I might need a table that holds the customer details. I might need a table that holds the employee detail information, the people who actually take and deal with the calls. So let's start out by building a table that holds the call or the ticket information. Now in the course files folder, you're going to find a notepad file called ticket_example_ben_lee.txt. And this contains the details of the first record that's going to go into our table when we create it. So you can see here, let's just review the fields. We have the ticket number, we have the title. So this is really just a brief description of the problem. His printer is broken. We have the customer name, the location, the region, who that call's been assigned to in the team, who it's been opened by, so effectively who logged the call, the opened date, who it's been resolved by, the resolved date, the priority, the category, and then finally at the bottom, we have a description. So this is going to be our first record in our ticket table. So let's minimize this down and create our first table. Now, if we jump up to the Create tab at the top here, we have a group for tables. And we have two options here, Table and Table Design. And these differ very, very slightly. One of them automatically gives us an ID field and the other one doesn't. And we're going to be using both of these as we go through the course, so you can really see how they work and how they differ from the other. Now, in this first table, we're just going to use the table option, and this is a new blank table. Now, notice that this is the one that contains this ID field, and this is a unique identifier for each record that we add. Now, we don't have to populate this with any information. It will automatically update with a unique number as we start to add records in. Now, what we essentially want to do here is we want to set up the column headings first of all. So those would be things like the customer name, the ticket number, the title of the call. So to do this, we need to right-click on the tab and we need to switch views. Remember, we were speaking about views in an earlier lesson. Currently, we're in Datasheet view. We need to jump into Design view. Now, as soon as we try to do that, it's going to ask us to give our table a name because currently it's just called the very generic Table 1. Now, when I'm naming my tables, when I'm working in Access, I like to have a standard naming convention. So I always put on the front of my tables TBL to distinguish them from other things like queries and reports. So I'm going to call this Table Ticket and click on OK. So you can see my table over in the navigation pane. And I'm now in Design View. And Design View basically has three columns: field name, data type, and description. Now, currently we have one field. This is automatically populated for us. This is the ID field, which will be assigned a unique number when we save the record. And currently it doesn't have a description. So let's add a quick description for this particular field. And remember, when I'm referring to fields, I basically mean columns. So my description is that this is the unique identifier for the ticket table. Now, another thing to note is that this ID field has a little key icon over on the left-hand side. And that means that this field is the primary key field. Now, I'm not going to get into this in too much detail because we do have another lesson dedicated to primary keys coming up very soon. But just be aware that that's what that key symbol is for the time being. So let's quickly refer back to our first ticket example. What is the first column heading or the first field? Well, it is ticket number. So in the field name underneath, I'm going to type in ticket underscore number. Now, every field that we add into our tables, we need to assign a data type. So you need to really look and think, okay, what type of data is going to go into this field or this column? Well, this is going to be a number. So if we click the drop down and notice here, the default is short text. That was something which we could see when we were in our access options. Now this is going to be a number, so I'm going to change this data type to number. And then we're going to add a description. Ticket number for this call. Now every time we add a new field into our table, we can see the field properties in the lower part of the screen. So let's run through some of the most important field properties that you might want to review and change. So for this particular ticket number field, it says field size long integer. Now, this basically means that this is a very, very, very long number. Now, this isn't. In general, my ticket numbers are about 6 characters long, so I'm going to change this to integer. Now, these different field sizes here, you can look these up in the help files if you want a full description of what each one is, but a byte is a very small number, and integer is kind of the one that I use most often, and then we have long integer, so on and so forth. So I'm going to change this to integer. And then right towards the bottom where we have required, it's currently set to no. So what we're basically saying here is the ticket number required in order to save this record? Well, yes, it is. Every call has a ticket number. So I'm going to double click to change this to yes. We then need to decide if this field is indexed or not. And again, I'm not going to go into indexing too much in this particular lesson because we're going to do that in the next couple of lessons. But indexing is basically related to how we search for records in our database. Some fields you will index, some others you won't. But the way that I look at this is, would I ever want to search for a particular call by the ticket number? Well, yes, I would. So I'm going to double click to say indexed yes, duplicates okay. So now we have two columns or two records in our table. If we switch back to Datasheet view, so let's right click and change to Datasheet view, it's going to ask us to save the table. Let's click on yes, and we can see how that looks. So we now have effectively two columns in our table, one that's going to hold the ID number and then one that's going to hold the ticket number. Now we have a lot more fields to add, and we're going to start that in the next lesson, and we're also going to talk a little bit more about indexing and primary keys. So in the last lesson, we created our first table and we named it Table Ticket. And this table is going to hold all of the ticket details for our callers. And currently we have two fields or two columns in this table, ID and ticket number. Now, if we just switch back into design view again, remember I mentioned in the last lesson that the first field here, the ID field, has a little key symbol, which means it's the primary key field. And if you take a look at the table design ribbon, you can see primary key is selected in the tools group. Now the primary key field is the field we use to uniquely identify a record. For every record that we add, a new unique number will be assigned to the record, which makes it easy for Access to identify each record. And you'll see that when we start adding some ticket information, the ID field will automatically generate a unique number. And every table that we create must have a primary key field that contains unique values. And we'll talk more about that as we create more tables. So let's add another column. If we refer back to our ticket, the next column is for the title. So this is just a brief explanation of exactly what the problem is. So let's click in the next field. We'll type in title and press the tab key. Once again, it defaults to short text, which in this case is fine because this is a brief description. So let's add a description, brief description of the issue. Once again, I'm going to select this and take a look at the field properties because these field properties change depending on the data type that you've selected. Now this is a short text field and currently it's telling me the field size is 255 characters. So this means that the description that we type into this field cannot be longer than 255 characters. Now, I think that's a little bit too long. I'm going to decrease this down to, let's say, 70 characters. They shouldn't be typing in any more than that in this particular field. Let's go down and take a look at required. Is the title required for this ticket? Yes, it is. Let's double click to change that to yes. Are we going to allow zero length? So can the agent log in this ticket, basically type nothing into this field? Well, no. So we're going to change that to no. Is this field going to be indexed? So will we ever want to search on the title of a ticket? Well, yes, we could do. So let's double click to change that to yes, duplicates, okay. And there is our third record. Now, so far, all of the fields that we've added through design view. But it is worth noting that you can also add fields through Datasheet view. So let's right click and switch back to Datasheet view. Yes, I want to save my changes. Notice now I have 3 column headings, and if I want to add another one from this particular view, I have a click to add at the side here. So if we click the drop down, this is where we can choose our data type. So the next field that we want to add is the customer name. So this is going to be another short text field. So let's click the drop down and choose short text. We can now name this field like so. Now it's also worth noting whilst we're working in this view, we can also do some resizing of these columns while we're here. For example, I can just drag the boundary out to make the column a little bit wider. Let's make this title a little bit wider as well. Actually, ticket number probably can be a bit smaller. And I'm going to drag customer ID out as well. If I want to get very specific about the size of my columns, I can right click on any of the column headings and go to field width. And this is where I can choose a specific width. So maybe if I put 20 and click on OK, it's going to change it for that column only. I could also do the same for the actual row heights as well. So if I right click and go to row height, I could change this to 20 as well. Let's click on OK, and we get a slightly larger row. Now notice with the rows, it changes all of the row height as opposed to just one. Now I don't actually want this row height, so I'm going to change them all back. Let's right click, go into row height, and if we choose standard height, that will set them back to the default height. Now let's switch back to design view and add a couple more columns. In fact, I need to add a description for this customer field. So very straightforward, name of customer. Once again, I'm going to select this field and check out the field properties. So field size, well, I don't think anyone's going to have a name that's 255 characters long, so let's just change this to 50. Is the customer name required? Yes, it is. Are we going to allow 0 length? No, we're not. Is this going to be indexed? Yes, it is, because we might want to search on the customer name. Now let me just take a moment just to explain indexing in a little bit more detail. Now currently the database that we're building is very, very small, but over time this will grow, and it might be that you have a very large database that you're dealing with. And once we have a large database, they can become quite sluggish or slow when we're running searches. So to really help with this and optimize the database, we can use indexing. So if a field is indexed, for example, the customer field, if someone searches for a customer name, Access can go directly to the record it needs, as opposed to having to churn through hundreds and even thousands of records. And we don't need to apply indexing to all fields. For example, something like a description field where we have just a lot of text in a field, we generally wouldn't search on that, so we probably wouldn't index a long description field. However, for things like ticket number, title, customer, those are all things that we could search on, and we want to optimize that search as much as possible, and so we want to make sure those fields are indexed. Now the next field we need to add is the location of this customer. And I can see that currently he's located in London. Now we have customers all over the world throughout our global offices. So customers could call in from any of our global offices. So when I'm adding this location field, what I actually want to do is help the agents out a little bit and provide them with a drop-down list from which they can choose the location. And we can do this using something called the Lookup wizard. And that's exactly what we're going to do in the next lesson. So we have a few different fields added into our table currently. And the next field we need to add is the location field for this particular customer. And as I mentioned, I want our agents to be able to pick from a drop-down list when choosing their location, so they don't have to type it in each time. Drop-down lists also help protect the data because we're really controlling the data that's going into the field. So it means that we're not going to get agents making spelling mistakes, which is going to throw up incorrect search results when we're searching our database. So let's add in our next field and let's use the Lookup wizard. And there are really two different ways that you can create your drop-down lists, and we're going to look at both of those. So let's go to our next field and type in location. Press the tab key to move across to the data type field, and this time we want to go all the way down to the bottom and choose Lookup wizard. Now, if you've ever used wizards in other Microsoft applications, then you'll know that they're really useful because they really just walk you through the entire process. So let's read through what it says at the top. This wizard creates a lookup field which displays a list of values you can choose from. Sounds pretty good so far. How do you want your lookup field to get its values? So obviously we need values to go into our drop-down list. So where are we going to get those from? And we have two options. And this is the two different methods that I was just talking about. So the first option is I want the lookup field to get the values from another table or query. So we could have another table which holds all of the locations for our customers and just link to that table. And we're going to do that in the next example. The alternative is that we can simply type in the values that we want to show in that list. And this is what we're going to choose for this particular example. So let's click on Next to move to the next step. So now we can simply type in our values. So I'm going to click in the first field and let's type in London. And I'm going to press the down arrow to go to the field underneath, and I'm just going to type in a list of all of the different places where we have an office. And there we go. Let's click on Next. We're now being asked what label we'd like for our lookup field. And the default here is location based off of the field name. And I'm completely happy with that, so I'm going to leave it as it is. Do we want to limit the entries to just these choices? So I'm going to say limit to list because that means that people can't just start adding new entries themselves. And do you want to store multiple values for this lookup? So are we allowing our agents to select multiple locations from this drop-down list? Well, no, we're not. So I'm not going to check this box. Let's click on Finish. Let's give this field a description, location of customer, and let's check out the field settings for this field. So once again, the field size is set to 255 characters. Now, am I going to have a city name that's over that? No, probably not. Let's reduce that to 30. Is it required? Yes, it is. Are we going to allow 0 length? No, we're not. Is this going to be indexed? Yes, it is. Now notice that if you do set up a field with a data type of lookup, you get an additional lookup tab down in the field properties. So here we can see that the display control is a combo box, basically a drop-down list. The row source type is a value list as opposed to a table, and then we have the row source information. So these are the cities that I typed in. And you can probably see how easy it is to modify the values that you have in that lookup list. If I wanted to add another city, I could simply click at the end or click wherever I like, add a semicolon, and then just type in the new city in quote marks. What you can also see a bit further down are some of the options that we set when we were walking through that lookup wizard. For example, limit to list is set to yes, allow multiple values is set to no, allow value list edits is set to yes. So let's take a look at this drop-down list to make sure that it's working. I'm going to right click and switch back to Datasheet view. I'm going to save my table. And now we have this location just here. And take a look at that. We have a little drop down and there are those different locations. Now, one thing I'm going to do before we move on to the next lesson is I'm going to start adding in a couple of records. So if we refer back to our ticket example, this is the first lot of information that I'm going to add in for the current fields that we have. Now, one thing I can see that's going to cause a problem is the ticket number just here. If I remember correctly, when we were setting up this field, we set the data type to number and the field size to integer. Now this is a ticket number as opposed to an actual number value, but this is a number that Access would consider a reasonably long number. So if I try and add this number into the ticket number field, it's probably not going to let me. So what I'm going to do is I'm quickly going to switch back to Design View and select this field. And I'm going to change the field property from integer to long integer. And again, I just double clicked my mouse to do that. Remember, with these fields, you can double click to cycle through the options, or you can go all the way over to the right hand side and choose from the drop down just here. So let's go back to Datasheet view. Let's save the table, and I'm going to pull these up side by side, and let's start adding in this information. So the first ticket number is 45874. Let's add that in and press the tab key. Perfect. It's accepting that number. Title, printer broken, the customer is Ben Lee, and his location is London. Now you're also going to find another sample ticket in the course files folder for record number 2. And this is the ticket here. It's called ticket_example_Deb_Ashby. So let's start typing in these details into the second record. So the ticket number is 65396. The title, mouse stopped working. Let's press the tab key. The customer is Deb Ashby, and the location is Paris. So we can select from our drop-down list. Now notice as I'm adding these tickets, the ID field is being automatically populated with a number. And these are those numbers that are unique to the record. And it's these numbers that we use to identify records in Access. So you're never going to get an ID number that is the same as another. Even if we start deleting records and moving things around, it's never going to assign a number that it's already used. Even if the record has been deleted, whatever ID number was assigned to that record is effectively discarded. It won't use that number again for the next record. So sometimes in this ID field, you won't have them running perfectly in sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so on and so forth. If you've deleted records and things like that, you might have all different kinds of ID numbers in here. Just remember that they are all unique. Since the last lesson, I've gone in and added a couple more fields and set them to use the Lookup wizard. And I've added these fields in exactly the same way that we added location. So you can see the two new fields that I've added, assigned to and opened by. So the assigned to field is the name of the IT team member that the ticket is assigned to, and the opened by is the name of the help desk agent who logged the call. And if we right click and jump across to Datasheet view, if we take a look at assigned to, we've got some names in there, and then opened by, we have names in there as well. Now you will find a couple of files that contain these names if you want to use those in the course files folder. Alternatively, you can use your own test names for both of these fields. And here is an example of one of those files that you'll find in the course files folder. So this one is the help desk staff. You can see here we have them listed out in column A, and there's also another Excel spreadsheet in the course files folder called IT team staff. And you'll find another list similar to this in there that you can use to populate these drop-down menus. As I said, if you want to use your own, then that's absolutely fine. So let's just populate both of these fields. So for the ticket for Ben Lee, this is assigned to Julie Lewis. So we need to select Julie Lewis from the drop-down, and it was opened by Olivia Hudson. So let's select her from the drop-down as well. And for the other ticket, I can see that it's assigned to Max Harper, and this was also opened by Olivia. So let's update those details. Assigned to Max Harper, opened by Olivia Hudson. Now I'm going to switch back to Design View. Now so far the majority of fields that we've added into our table have been either short text field, and we have one number field in here. So let's take a look at some more options that we have when it comes to adding numeric fields. So the next field that we're going to add is opened date. Press the tab key. Now if we click the drop down here for the data type, we want to choose the date and time data type. Let's add a quick description. The date the ticket was opened by the agent. And if we take a look down at the field properties, because this is a different data type, we have different field properties. So the first one here is the format of the date that we want to use. So if we click the drop down, we can see the different formats that we can choose from. So I'm going to choose the medium date format. Required? Yes, it is. Indexed? Yes. Let's add another field. This time, resolved by, and our tickets are going to be resolved by members of the IT team. So once again, I'm going to add a lookup wizard. I'm going to type the values that I want. Let's click on next. And then I can type those in based off the information in the spreadsheet that's in the course files folder. So here is that spreadsheet, and I just want to put these names into column 1. There we go. Let's click on next. I'm happy with the label. Let's limit to list and click on finish. Final thing to do here is add a description. And the final field that we're going to add here in this lesson is the resolved date. Once again, we're going to choose date and time. Let's make sure that the format is medium date. Required, yes. Indexed, yes. And let's add a quick description. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to add in some data validation. Because in Access, you can add in data validation rules to prevent certain information being input into the table. For example, maybe I want to make sure that the resolved date is not before the opened date. So in order to prevent an agent from entering in the incorrect date, I could add in some data validation. And I want this to apply across my whole database, not just the field. So I'm going to go up to Table Design and open up the property sheet. There is a keyboard shortcut to open this of Alt-Enter. Now notice over here on the right hand side, this is the property sheet. And this is where we can set up validation rules for our database. So where we have validation rule, I'm going to click in the field and then click these 3 dots. And this allows me to build my own data validation expression. And we can do this using fields that we already have in our table. Now, the fields that I need to use in this expression are the open date field and the resolved date field. But notice just below, when we have tool tickets selected, the fields aren't listed there. And that's because I haven't saved the last changes I made. So let's give our table a quick save. I'm going to right click on the table tab and just click the save button. If you get any messages pop up about data integrity rules, don't worry about these. Just click on cancel. And now when we go back in and jump into our expression builder, you should find that those fields update. So the data validation rule that we want to apply just here is that the resolved date, and we can just double click to select that field, must be greater than or equal to the opened date. Click on OK. So now if you take a look, we have that little formula in the validation rule field. What we can then do is add some validation text. So I'm going to say the resolved date must be after the opened date. And this is what the agent is going to see if they accidentally enter in a resolved date that is actually before the opened date. So let's close down the property sheet and let's test out this rule. So I'm going to switch back to a datasheet view. Let's save the table. Again, I'm going to say no. And now we can start entering in the information. So if we take a look at this ticket for Ben Lee, the open date is 3/5/2022. So we can use the calendar picker for this, or we can simply type it in. So I'm going to say 3/5/2022. Now I can see here that the call was resolved by Julie Lewis and the resolved date was 3/7/2022. So a couple of days after the ticket was opened, which should be absolutely fine. So let's make those changes. Resolved by Julie Lewis and the resolved date was 3/7/2022. And there we go. Perfect. Now let's do the next one, but let's put the opened date after the resolved date. So let's say that this was opened on the 5th of the 3rd, 2022. And let's say it was resolved by Max Harper. But this time I'm going to put a resolved date of the 4th of March, 2022 to put it before the open date. And check out what happens. That data validation rule is kicking in. And you can see here it comes up with the resolved date must be after the open date. So the agent immediately knows that they've made a mistake and they need to go back and review that field. So it looks like our data validation is working perfectly. So I'm going to change this to a few days after, and now everything is working. In this lesson, we're just going to finish up adding the final 3 fields to our table. And you can see here that the fields that we still need to add are the priority, the category, and the description. Now the priority is either going to be 1, 2, 3, or 4, and there might be some kind of SLA attached to those priorities where a priority 1 has to be fixed within 2 days, a priority 2 might be up to 4 days, so on and so forth. And for the categories, we're going to have 4 of those: hardware, software, new joiner, and service request. So let's add those into our table. So the first one here is priority. Now this is going to be either a number from 1 to 4. So we're going to choose number and the description. And we're going to change the field size to, let's change it to integer. Is it required? Yes, we need to assign a priority to every ticket. Is it going to be indexed? Well, yes, we might want to search on priority. Maybe we want to search for all the priority ones. So we're going to index the field. The next field is going to be the category. And for this one, we are going to do a lookup. So let's jump into the lookup wizard. I'm going to type the values. Let's click on next. And the values we want in here for the category are hardware. We want software, service request, and new joiner. Let's click on next. Let's limit to list and click on finish. Let's add a quick description and then we can review our field properties. So the field size, I don't want 255 characters. Let's keep that at 30. Is it required? Yes. Are we allowing 0 length? No, we're not. Is it going to be indexed? Yes, we might want to search by the category. And the final field to add in here is description. So this is where the agent can type in a longer description of the problem. So for this, we're going to use the long text data type. Let's type in a description for the description, and then finally let's review the field properties. Now for this, is a description required? Yes, it is. Are we going to allow 0 length? No, we're not. Is this going to be indexed? Now this is one of those situations where we might not want to index this field. When it comes to long text fields where you could have multiple paragraphs of a description, in general, you're not really going to search on the description field. You're much more likely to use one of the other fields if you're searching for a ticket, so maybe the ticket number or the customer name or who it's been assigned to. So we're going to leave indexed on no for the description. So we are pretty much done. But one thing I am actually going to do here is I can see I've got a bit of an inconsistency. So separating ticket and number, I have an underscore, whereas everything else, I haven't got a space. So I'm just going to delete that out. Let's right click and switch to Datasheet view. Yes, I want to save the table. Remember, we can just ignore this. So let's say no. And now I'm going to go through and just complete the new fields for these two tickets. So for Ben Lee's call, the priority is 2, the category is hardware, and the printer stopped working 2 days ago after a paper jam is the description. So I'm actually just going to copy this to make it a bit easier. So priority is 2, the category is hardware, and the description, I'm going to click in the field, Control V to paste that in. What about for the second ticket? Let's take a look. Well, the priority here is priority 3. It's hardware again, and this is the description. So I'm just going to copy this. Let's go back. Priority 3, category is hardware. Click in the description, Control V to paste. So I pretty much have all of the fields in my table that I want to add at this stage. We are going to create some other tables in a couple of lessons' time, but really the first thing I want to do is populate more records into this table, because currently we only have 2, and that's not really enough to work with throughout the balance of this course. So in the next lesson, I'm going to show you a quick way to import multiple records from an Excel spreadsheet so that we have some data to work with. It's time now to complete exercise 3. And in this exercise, we're going to practice some of the skills that we've learned in this section of the course. So the first thing I'd like you to do is just to create a new blank database. And I'd like you to name that database Customer Orders. Now, when we create that database, it's automatically going to create us a brand new table. So I'd like you to add the following fields into that table: order ID, order date, customer name, product, quantity, price per unit, and total. I'd like you to use the data type and the description listed in this table just here, and make sure you set the properties as required. Once you've created that table, I'd like you to set the ID field as the primary key. Make sure you save the table and name the table Table Orders. Now, once we have that table, we need to populate it with some information. So I'd like you to download the file orders.xlsx, which you'll find in the exercise files folder, and just add the details manually for the first 3 customers in that spreadsheet. Once you have those 3 customers in the table, I'd then like you to go in and add another field and create a lookup. So the field name is going to be called Payment Method, and the data type is going to be Lookup Wizard. I'd like you to type your own list of values and use the following items as those values: credit, debit, and voucher. And don't forget to limit to list. Add a description for the field, type of method used for payment, and make sure that you set the field properties as specified in point 9. Then we're going to add the final field to the table, the shipping charge. The data type for this one is going to be currency. We need to add our description and also our properties. And then what I'd like you to do is to create a data validation rule on the quantity field that ensures agents cannot enter a quantity greater than 10. And I'd like you to make sure that there is also a validation message: quantity must not exceed 10 items per customer. So quite a bit to do there. See how you get on. If you'd like to see my answer, then please keep watching. So the first thing I asked you to do here was simply to create a new blank database. Select a location to save the database and then give your database a name. So we're going to call as customer orders and click on OK. Let's click on create. And as I mentioned, when you first create a new database, it's going to automatically create a new table for you. So we're going to switch across to design view. Let's make sure we give our table a name. This is going to hold our order information. So we're going to call it table orders and click on OK. So now we need to add our fields. Now the ID field has been automatically populated. So let's just give it a description. And now we can add in those other fields. So now that we have all of those fields added in and we've set the field properties, the final thing to check here is to make sure that the ID field is set as the primary key, which I can see that it is. Let's right click and save our table. So now we have our table, but currently we don't have any information in the table. So the next part of this exercise was to download the Excel file orders.xlsx from the exercise files folder and add in the details for the first 3 customers in that spreadsheet. So now I have those first 3 records in the table. Let's give it a save. And the next thing I asked you to do was to add another field for the payment method. And for this, we're going to use a lookup. So let's type in payment method. And our data type is going to be lookup wizard. Now I asked you to type in your own values. So let's select the second option and click on next. And the payment method is going to be either credit, debit, or voucher. Let's click on next. We're going to limit to list and click on finish. Let's add a description for this field. Once again, we're going to check our field properties. So let's set this to, let's say 50. Required, yes. 0 length, no. Indexed, yes. And then we have one more field to add, and that is the shipping charge. This one is a currency field, and let's add a description. Let's just take a look at our field properties. So required, yes. Indexed, yes. So let's give our table a save, because the next thing I asked you to do was to add a data validation rule to the quantity field. And the data validation that we want to set up here is that the quantity has to be less than 10. So in the validation rule area here, we're going to say less than 10. And we're going to add some validation text. So if an agent enters in a quantity that is greater than 10, they're going to get this message pop up. Let's give our table a save one more time. So if we now go back to the datasheet view, let's quickly test our rule. So I'm just going to change the quantity of this first one to 11. And I'm getting my little data validation text pop up so I can see that this is working fine. And that's it. That is all I needed you to do for this particular exercise. I hope you got on okay with that, and I will see you in the next section. In this lesson, we're going to see how easy it is to import multiple records in bulk from an Excel spreadsheet. Because currently in our Access table, we only have 2 records for 2 customers, and we need quite a bit more data to work with throughout the balance of this course. So instead of going through and adding all of these records manually, which is going to take a lot of time, I'm just going to import them all in one go. And this might be something that you find yourself needing to do from time to time. So let's take a look at how it works. Now, the most important thing that you need to remember is that the column headings in your Excel spreadsheet must exactly match the field headings that you have in your Access table. If they don't exactly match, then Access isn't going to know how to map the data across. So it's always worth checking that these column headings in Excel do exactly match your Access fields. Once you're happy with that, let's give the spreadsheet a save, close it down, and jump back to our Access table. Now, in order to import, we need to do this from the External Data tab. and check out the first group here, import and link. This is where we can come to import data from multiple different sources, not just Excel. And we're going to see in the next lesson how we can do pretty much exactly the same thing using a text file instead. So if we go to From File, this is where we're going to find the option to import from Excel, but we can also import from an HTML document, an XML file, or a text file. We can import from other database applications. So maybe I have information stored in another Access database. I can import from there, or maybe from an SQL server. I can even import from online services, so things like SharePoint list information I can import, and then we have other sources. We can create connections. We can create ODBC connections, and even import information from an Outlook folder. Now for us, we have our information stored in an Excel file, so we're going to choose From File and Excel. So this opens up the import wizard. Now the first thing we need to do is specify where our file is stored. So this is fairly straightforward. Let's click on Browse. So I'm in the Course Files folder, and there is the file ticketinfoimport.xlsx. Once again, you will find this file in the Course Files folder. So wherever you download it to is going to be the location that you select it from. So let's click on Open. Now we need to specify how and where we want to import this data. And we have 3 different options. So the first one, import the source data into a new table in the current database. So if I wanted to import all of those records into a brand new table in Access, so not into Tubble Ticket, then I would choose that first option. If I want to append these records onto the bottom of an existing table, I would choose the second option, and that is the one that we're going to use. The final option allows us to link to the data source by creating a linked table. And we're going to talk more about linked tables a little bit later on. So we're going to choose the second option. We want to append these records to, we only have one table, Tubble Ticket. Let's click on OK. Now, you're probably going to get this message. The table you're trying to append to is currently open and must be closed before proceeding. Do you want to save the changes and close the table? Well, yes, I do. So now we can see in the Import Spreadsheet wizard a preview of our data. So I can scroll through and take a look at this just to make sure that everything is in order. We can use the horizontal scroll arrow to scroll across and check to make sure everything is looking fine, which it is. So let's click on Next. We're importing to Tubble Ticket. Let's click on Finish. And then at the final stage, we get the option to save these import steps. So if you find that you're always importing data from Excel, you could choose to save all of the steps that we've just been through, so that the next time you do this, it's going to jump you straight to this part of the wizard, saving you a few minutes of your time. Now, we're not going to save the import steps, and we're not even going to import our data from this Excel file. Because what I want to do is actually import the data in the next lesson, where we do pretty much exactly the same thing, but using a text file instead. Just know that if you were to click Close, all of those records are going to import into Tubble Ticket. And you're going to see the outcome of this in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to see how we can do exactly the same thing, but this time using a text file. So I basically have all of the same information contained in the Excel spreadsheet that we used in the previous lesson in a text file instead. And the thing with text files is that they kind of look very jumbled. But the important thing to note here is that each of the fields is separated with a delimiter. And that delimiter in this case is a tab. So if you take a look at the heading row, you can see ticket number, then we have a tab, title, then a smaller tab, customer tab, so on and so forth. Remember, tabs in Notepad files aren't always even, so we don't have the same amount of gap in between each field. It really depends on the length of the item in that particular column, let's say. And this is why it has this kind of jumbled look, because nothing is lined up. And this is important information that we need to know if we're trying to import records from a text file. Now this time we are going to finish off the process and import these files in. So let's close this file down and let's run through the process. Now importing a text file is fairly similar to importing an Excel file. We go up to the External Data tab, into New Data Source, from File, but this time we're going to choose Text File. Now we get the same wizard pop up, so we just need to browse to where our file is located. There it is just there, ticketinfo import.txt, and click on Open. Once again, we're going to append the records to Table Ticket, which is our only table at the moment, and click on OK. We're going to save the changes and close our table. And now you can see a preview of all of the data from that text file. So this is where it differs from the Excel import, because what we need to do here is we need to tell Access where our columns are separated. And we can do that using the delimiter, which is that tab separator. So right at the top, I have delimited selected by default. And you can see here it says characters such as a comma or a tab separate each field, which is perfect. So let's click on Next. So now we get to choose the delimiter that separates our fields, and the default is tab, and that is the one that we're actually using in our text file. However, if our fields were separated with a semicolon or a space or something else entirely, we could also specify that up here as well. One important thing, make sure that you define that the first row contains your field names. Let's click on Next. We're importing to Table Ticket, and let's click on Finish. Once again, we get the option to save our import step. So if we plan to do this multiple times, this is a good option to choose because it's going to jump us straight to this end stage and save all of our previous settings that we just applied. I'm not going to do this because we're only importing this once in this course. So let's click on Close. And it pretty much looks like nothing has happened. So let's reopen Table Ticket and see if our records are there. Double click to reopen and check it out. How lovely does that look? So now we have a lot more data to work with. And what I might want to do is just go in here and maybe do some rearranging. So maybe I want to make these columns a little bit wider so I can see the full title. Maybe I want to make the priority slightly smaller, so on and so forth. I could go through, but in general, I like to organize my columns so that I can pretty much see all of my data on one page without having to scroll horizontally. Now that won't always be possible, but if you can, it's definitely worthwhile. So now that we have some records to play around with, it's time to move on to the next lesson where we're going to speak a little bit more about Datasheet View. It's time now for us to complete exercise 4. And in this exercise, we're going to practice some of the skills that we've learned in this section of the course. So I'd like you to import all of the records from the Excel file orders.xlsx. And once again, you'll find this in the exercise files folder. And I'd like you to import them into Table Orders in Access. When you import, ensure that you append the records to the correct table and you don't need to save the import steps. Once you've completed the import, just double click by opening the table to make sure that all of those records have imported successfully. So that is it. Give it a go. If you'd like to see my answer, then please keep watching. So let's import our order records from an Excel file. I've closed down all of my tables. Let's jump up to External Data, New Data Source, From File, and Excel. Let's browse to where we have our Excel file saved. There it is just there. It's called Orders. Let's click on Open, and we want to make sure we append a copy to Table Orders. Let's click on OK. So now we get a preview of what our data is going to look like. That looks pretty good. Let's work through the wizard. We're going to import to Table Orders. Remember, when you import, it looks like it's done nothing. So let's double click to open Table Orders, and there are our imported records. In this lesson of the course, I just want to speak a little bit more about making design changes when you're working in Datasheet View. So I'm currently in Datasheet View. Remember, this is what Datasheet View looks like. If we right-click and switch to Design View, that is where we have our fields. Now, Design View is really where we design how our table is going to look and the field headings that we have. But we can also make design changes when we're working in Datasheet view. Now, we don't have as many changes that we can make from here, but there's definitely a few things that we can do. Now, the first thing to notice is that when we're working in Datasheet view, we get two new contextual ribbons, Table Fields and Table. And these contain options that will allow us to make minor design changes to our table. Now, the Table tab, pretty much everything on here, apart from relationships, is outside the scope of this beginner's course. So we're going to shift our focus to the Table Fields tab. So let's work our way along and see the types of things that we can do from here. Now, if we start with the first group, we have the Views group. This is pretty self-explanatory. We can switch between Datasheet view and Design view from here. The next group, Add and Delete, allows us to quickly add new fields into our table. Now, we briefly saw previously how we can add new fields into our table from Datasheet view. If you cast your eyes all the way over to the right hand side, you can see here, click to add. We did this previously. We can click the drop down and then we can choose a data type for this particular field. Now, the disadvantage of this is that we can only add fields onto the end if we use this method. We can't add them sort of somewhere in the middle. For example, maybe I wanted a new column in between location and assigned to. Using this method, that isn't possible. But this is where the Add and Delete group comes in on the Table Fields ribbon. So if I wanted to add a new field in the middle of my table, I just need to select the column, and then maybe I want to add a new short text field. I can click short text and it's going to add it to the right of the column that I have selected. I can then simply go in and just overtype field 2, which is the generic standard default name, with whatever I want this column to be called. So I'm just going to call this test for the time being. Now, I don't want this column or the one that we've added on the end, so this brings me on to my next point, and that is deleting fields. We can do that from Datasheet view as well. I just need to select the column, and then in the Add and Delete group, we have a big old delete button. I'm going to say yes to permanently delete it, and then I can scroll to the end where we have this field 1, and I'm also going to delete that. Now, the next group is the Properties group. And you'll notice that some of these, about half of them in this case, are grayed out. Now, this is where we can come to set some basic field properties. So if you remember, every time we added a field in Design view, we would modify those field properties in the lower half of the screen. So things like the field size, if the field is indexed, if it's required, all of those types of things. And we have minimal access to do that from Datasheet view as well. So if I click in one of these fields, let's click in the title field. This is a short text field. And I can see that in the formatting group, it's telling me short text. If I was to click in, let's say, the open date field, it's telling me that the data type is date time. Now let's go back to the short text field, the title. You can see here the options that are available to me for modification. For example, I could click on Name and Caption, and that's going to allow me to change the title of this field, add a caption, and also change the description. I could click on Default Value, and this will allow me to build an expression. I could change the field size, so maybe I decide that I want to increase this to 100 characters. I can change that from there. But notice that Modify Lookups and these other settings are grayed out. If I click in the Open Date field, I get a different set of options. So this time I can't modify the field size, but I can modify the name and caption and the default value. I can even change the format that we chose. If you remember, we chose that medium date format. And in the field validation group at the end, this is showing me if this field is required and if it's indexed. Now let's click in a field where we have a lookup. So if we click in assigned to, this is where we have a drop-down list to choose from. Now I get more options activated in the properties group. So I can now jump in and modify the lookups. So if I wanted to add more names to the bottom of this list, or maybe remove somebody if they move out of the department, for example, I can do that from here as well. What about if I click in a field which has a data validation rule? So let's click in the resolved date field. Now in the field validation group, I have a validation dropdown, and I can see here that I have a validation rule and a validation message applied because those icons have a gray background. If I want to see the validation rule, I can open it up, and there is my formula. The resolved date must be greater than or equal to the open date. So I could change that expression from Datasheet view as well. If I want to modify the validation message, I can click on that and I can make my changes in here. So those are the design modifications that you can make when you're working in Datasheet view. Not quite as comprehensive as design view, but just be aware that you do have certain options. If you're familiar with sorting and filtering in an application like Excel, then you're going to find sorting and filtering in Access really straightforward, because the functionality is very similar to Excel. So let's start out by talking about filtering. Now, if you're not sure what I mean by filtering, filtering allows us to really zone in on the information that's of most interest to us at any given time. For example, maybe I only want to see records that are of a certain priority, priority 1. I could use a filter to filter out all of the other records and just see the priority 1 records. And there are a couple of ways that we can filter records in a table. So if I'm going to filter on the priority column, I'm going to make sure I select it. And then on the Home tab in the Sort and Filter group, I have a filter option just here. So let's click on Filter. It's going to pop open this little floating window and it's going to show me all of the values that I have in this column. So if I only want to see priority 1 tickets, I can deselect everything and just choose priority 1, click on OK, and it's going to filter that list. So now I can really zone in on those tickets of the highest priority. Now, one other thing to note is that when you have a filter applied, like I do here, if you cast your eyes down to the bottom of the screen, you can see that we have this little filtered notification just here. And this is basically a toggle, so I can click it to unfilter the list and put it back, click it again, and it's going to apply that same filter. And we also have this toggle in the Sort and Filter group. You can see here, toggle filter. Click once, it's going to put everything back. Click it again, it's going to rerun that filter. Now, the other method that we can use to filter our data is we can hover our mouse over this little filter icon in the column. So if I click this, I'm going to get the same thing. And this time, maybe I'm interested in priority 4 calls. Click on OK, and it's going to filter that list. If I want to clear the filter, as opposed to toggle it, I can click the drop down again, and we have clear filter from priority. And we can also combine and use multiple filters at the same time. So maybe I'm only interested in seeing customers located in, let's say, London, who have logged a call in the category service request. Click on OK, and there we go, we have 1 record. If I want to put this back to how it was, I'm going to click on Toggle Filter, and everything's back to how it was originally. Now, something else we can do with filters is that we can use text and number filters. If I click the drop down underneath Customer and choose Text Filters, I then get some additional options. So maybe I want to filter for all customers that have WA in their name. So I'm going to go for Contains, and I'm going to say asterisk WA asterisk and click on OK. And check it out. It's returned Blanca Watts, John Walton, and Carlos Wagner. So don't forget about those little text filters that you have in there as well. Let's clear the filter from the customer. We have a similar thing when we have numbers or dates in our columns. So if I click on the drop down next to Open Date, I have some date filters in here. So I can choose to filter for tickets that were opened yesterday, tickets that were opened last week or last month or last quarter or last year. So I'm going to go for last quarter, and there you go, there is the list of tickets. Click again to clear that date filter. If I go to a field that contains numbers, let's click. This time we get number filters. So there's the 3 different ones there: text filters, date filters, and number filters. So maybe I want to filter for all calls that have a priority between 1 and 3. Click on OK, and there we go. I pretty much get all of the calls except the priority 4 calls. Click again to clear the filter. So now that we understand filtering, let's talk about sorting. Once again, there are a couple of different ways that we can sort our records. So if we take a look on the Home tab in the Sort and Filter group, we can choose to sort in ascending or descending order depending on the column that we're currently clicked on. So maybe I want to sort all of my calls by the date they were opened in ascending order. I can click in that column, click on ascending, and I think they already were in ascending to be fair. Let's change it to descending to switch that around. So very simple, ascending or descending. Maybe I want to sort them alphabetically by the customer name. So if I click ascending there, it's going to sort those records. If I want to remove the sort, I have a button just here to remove sort, and it's going to put everything back to how it was originally. We also have these same sort options. If we click the drop down arrow, we have sort A to Z and sort Z to A. Now, one point about sorting that is worth noting, if you do have a column that contains both numerical values and text. And an example that springs to mind would be maybe if you have a database that houses movie names. Maybe you have a movies database. And one of your movies is 10 Things I Hate About You. Because it starts with 10, Access considers it to be a numerical value. And anything that has both numbers and text, if you apply a sort, the numbers are going to be at the top of the list. So just be aware of that if that situation arises on your data. In the final lesson of this section, we're just going to focus in a little bit more on how we can enter and modify data when we're working in Datasheet view. Now, I already mentioned in previous lessons how we can change the layout of the information that we're seeing when we're working in Datasheet view. For example, if we want to resize these columns, we can drag the boundaries. Alternatively, we can right-click on the column heading and we can change the field width this way. So we can be very specific, or if we just want to revert to the default, we can choose standard width. Click on OK, and it's going to change it to the default width for this column. Now that's a bit too skinny for me. I'm going to drag it out to resize that. We also saw how we can do the same for rows, so we can drag these up and down. But remember, for rows, when we change the row height, it's going to change for all of the rows. If we want to get back to how they were before, we can right-click and go to row height and choose standard height. Click on OK to put things back. So really nice and simple. Now, what about if we want to move columns around? So maybe I decide that I want the priority column to be in between the customer name and the location. Well, this is simply a case of dragging and dropping. So I can pick up the column, I can drag it to where I want it, and you can see where that black line is where it's going to be placed when I let go of my mouse. Now, the good thing about this is that even if we rearrange the columns in Datasheet view, if we switch back to design view, the column order isn't going to change. So the underlying data, the underlying structure doesn't change. We're really just changing the way that we're viewing our columns. Now, I don't actually want this column just there, so I'm going to move that back to where it was. And I think it was just there. Now, something else you might want to do is you might want to hide columns. And hiding columns can be quite useful if you're not interested in certain columns of information, particularly if you have a lot of columns and you find yourself having to scroll backwards and forwards. You can hide the columns that you're not interested in and just see a smaller view of the columns that you want. So maybe I'm not interested in the ticket number. What I could do here is right-click, and you can see I have an option to hide fields. So if I click this, it's going to hide it. If I want to bring that back, I can simply right-click on any of the column headings and choose Unhide Fields. It's then going to ask me which columns do you want to unhide. Now, because I've only hidden one, it's the only one that isn't selected. So I can click, close, and that column is back again. Now, what about when we want to make changes to records when we're working in Datasheet view? Now, there's a couple of important points to be aware of here. If I'm clicked in ticket number and I press the tab key to move across to the title, notice that by default, the entire title is highlighted in black. And that means if I start to type now, it's basically going to overtype everything that I have in there. So it's going to delete mouse stopped working. Now, if you don't want to do that, maybe you just want to change a word, or maybe you want to append onto the end, you need to make sure that you click in the cell and you can see your cursor. You don't want that text to be highlighted in black because you're going to over type. So maybe I want to change this to, let's say, mouse replacement. Like so. And we can just carry on tabbing through our fields. If we want to move down to the next record, we can use our arrow keys just to do that. And we can use our arrow keys to move up and down and across. Now, when we are editing a field, so let's just double click in Restore File Request. If I start to type something, notice that I get a little pencil icon over on the left-hand side. And that really just tells me that I'm currently editing that field. Now, what about if we want to add some more records to this list? Well, there's a couple of ways that we can do this. Right at the bottom, we have a new area, and we can simply start typing in our record information. But we can also add new records in a different part of the screen as well. If you cast your eyes all the way down to the bottom, we have this little area that's referred to as the record selector. And there's numerous different things that we can do in here. So if I click at the top in record number 1, I can scroll through my records that way. So notice it's currently telling me I'm clicked in record 1 of 23. If I click somewhere else, I'm now clicked in record 8 of 23. And if I want to move through my records, I can use this next record button and it's going to move me through. I can go back, I can jump to the last record, or I can jump to the first record in the list. And if I want to add a brand new record, I have a new blank record button just here. It's going to add a new one onto the bottom, and I can simply start typing to add that information in. It's now time to do exercise 5, where we're going to practice some of the skills that we've learned in this section of the course. So the first thing I'd like you to do is just simply open up Table Orders and just practice switching between views. And remember, there are a few different methods that we can use to switch between those different views. I'd then like you to switch into Datasheet view and just make sure you're familiar with the Table Fields ribbon. Remember, we can use that ribbon in Datasheet view to adjust those field properties. I'd then like you to sort the records in Table Orders A to Z by the customer name. I'd then like you to practice applying filters. So filter the records in Table Orders to show all orders made by a customer with the last name Nash. I'd then like you to remove the filter. So that's it for this exercise. Give it a go. If you'd like to see my answer, then please keep watching. So the first thing I asked you to do in this exercise is open up Table Orders and practice switching between different views. Now remember, we can switch between different views simply by right-clicking on the tab, and we can switch into Design View or Datasheet View. Now remember that the options that you see in here, or the different views, will vary depending on if you have a table open, a form, a report, so on and so forth. Another way we can switch views is on the Home tab in the Views group just here. So once again, we can switch between Design View and Datasheet View. And finally, right down in the bottom right-hand corner, we have two small icons, and these also allow us to switch between Datasheet View and Design View. Now, if we switch back to Datasheet View for 1 second, the next thing I asked you to do was really just to familiarize yourself with the options that we have on the Table Fields ribbon. Remember, this is where we can come to adjust our field properties. We don't necessarily have to be in Design View. So from this ribbon, we can adjust our views, we can add new columns and select the relevant data type, we can modify the properties for each of our fields, we can apply formatting and also data validation. So just make sure you're aware of all of these different options on this ribbon. The next thing I asked you to do was to sort this table by customer name A to Z. So I'm going to click in the customer name column. Let's go to Home, and in the Sort and Filter group we have A to Z or Z to A. So let's choose A to Z, and it's going to sort all of my records for me. I then asked you to practice applying filters to your data. And once again, in the Sort and Filter group, we have a filter option just here. And I asked you to look for all of the customers with the last name of Nash. So for this, we're going to go down to Text Filters, and because this is a last name, I could choose Contains, that would work, or I could do Ends With. So let's type in Ends With Nash, click on OK, and now you can see it's producing a result of 3 records. Remember, this filter is a toggle, so we can click toggle filter to put everything back, toggle filter to run that same filter again. If we want to clear the filter, we can click the drop down on the filtered column and choose clear filter from customer name. In this section of the course, we're going to shift our focus and start talking about relationships. Because relationships are one of the fundamental concepts that you need to get your head around when you're working with tables in Access. Now, relationships are really about linking different tables together. So currently at the moment, we only have one table in our database, but that's going to change in a moment. We're going to add some more tables. I'm going to show you how to link them together and why you might want to do that. So let's take a look at that latter point first of all, and talk a little bit about exactly what a relationship is. Now, for example, I've got two separate tables just here. Let's say that the one on the left is the ticket table and the one on the right is the address table. Now, these two tables are individual tables that are not linked together in any way, shape or form at the moment. Now, let's say that the table on the left is the main table in our database. And in the real world, this would have a lot more columns than just 3. Now, I have the customer information in that table on the left. And maybe once I've built my database, I want to be able to interrogate and maybe run queries and reports that utilize the customer's address. But currently, I don't have that addressing information within that main table. I do, however, have the address information in a completely separate table that we can see on the right-hand side. But because these two tables aren't linked, they don't interact with each other. So currently, if I was to search for the customer and I wanted to see the address information, it's not going to be able to find that because the database doesn't really know that these two tables are linked together. So the way that we would link these two tables is by using the common field. And you can see the common field here is highlighted. It is the customer field. So I can link the table on the left to the table on the right using the customer field in both because it's common between the two tables. Once we've done that, we then have that link and it means that we can access the address information in the other table. Now, what if we have a slightly different situation? Maybe we have two tables, but they don't have a common field. So once again, I have my table on the left, which has ID, ticket number, and customer. We have address information in the table on the right, but there's no field that they both share to link these together. So how would we get around that? Well, this is where we would create ourselves a link table. And a link table is a table that kind of sits in between and contains a field from one table and a field from another. And we can then use that link table to bring those tables together. So you can see that example here. The link table in the middle has two fields. It has customer and it has address. And we have the customer field in the ticket table and the address field in the address table. So using that link table in the middle, we can link both of these tables together. And that's basically how relationships work in Access. And we're going to be exploring the different options we have, not only for linking tables together, but also creating link tables to link together two tables that don't share a common field. So I hope that makes things a little clearer. I will see you in the next lesson. So now we understand how relationships work, it's time to put that knowledge into action. Now, currently, we've been working basically in one table, that is Toolbar ticket. And we have quite a few columns in this table, but maybe I want to create another table that houses some additional information. So something that I don't really have in this table currently is a status field that indicates if this call is active, if it's on hold, or if it's closed. So what we're going to do is we're going to create another table that holds all of these different statuses. So let's go up to the Create tab. We're going to go to Tables and we're going to choose Table Design. Now remember, when you choose Table Design, you don't get an ID field. That's okay in this case. We're just going to have one field and it's going to be called Status. The data type is going to be short text, and if we take a look at the field properties, I'm going to take this down to 50. Is it required? Let's say yes. Are we going to allow zero length? No. Is this indexed? Well, yes, I could very well search on all calls that are closed, for example. Now, the final thing we need to do here is we need to set this field as the primary key field. Because it's the only field that we have in the table, we don't have much of a choice. So let's select it. And just above on the table design ribbon, we're going to click primary key. So now that we've done that, let's right click and switch into Datasheet view. We're going to be asked to save our table, which is fine. And we're going to call this Table Status and click on OK. So now I have my table. It's a very small table. It just has one column, one field called status. So now I can add into this table the different statuses that a call might have. So a call might be active. It might be on hold, it might be resolved, or it might be closed. So now we have two active tables. Now I'm going to close down both of these, and we're going to jump across and take a look at the table relationships. So to do this, we jump up to Database Tools, we have a Relationships group, and we can jump into the Relationships window. Now currently this is empty, but if we cast our eyes over to the right hand side, notice we have an Add Tables pane. And just below I can see both of my tables. So I'm going to select both of them, and we can hold down Control to select more than one and click on Add Selected Tables. And this adds the tables to the main window. We can drag and drop them if we need to reorganize them. We can also resize them if we want to see all of the fields. We can drag that down, and we can really place these and give ourselves a bit more of an idea as to how these tables relate to one another. Now, currently, these tables are not related at all. So if I wanted to run a query or search for a call by its status, I couldn't currently do that because our status table isn't related or linked to anything in our main table. And just so you know, there is some database terminology for these different tables. The main table, which is normally the biggest table that has the majority of your fields in it, so for me that's Table Ticket, this is your fact table. And all of the smaller tables that hold additional information, these are called dimension tables. Now, somehow I need to link Table Ticket to Table Status. And if you recall in the previous lesson, we were talking about linking tables using common fields. And these two tables don't have a common field because we don't have a status field in the ticket table. So we're going to need to create ourselves another table. It's going to be a link table that contains a field from Table Ticket and a field from Table Status. And then we're going to be able to link these tables together. And that is exactly what we're going to do in the next lesson. In the last lesson, we created ourselves a small second table and called it Table Status. And this table basically holds ticket status information. So whether that ticket is active, on hold, resolved, or closed. And we mentioned that currently Table Status isn't linked to Table Ticket in any way. And we can't simply link them together because the two tables don't have a common field. So this is where we need to create ourselves a link table. So we're going to close down the relationships window. I'm going to say yes to save the changes. Let's jump up to create, and this time we're going to select table because I do want an ID field this time. Now we're going to switch straight into design view, and it's asking me to save my table. Now this is going to be our link table that basically links the ticket table and the status table. So the name I'm going to give it is Table Ticket Status. And let's click on OK. So the first field is the unique ID for this specific table. So this is the unique ID for the table ticket status. So I'm going to leave this on auto number. Let's give it a description. Unique ID, primary key of this table. Now the next two fields that we add are basically going to be a field from the ticket table and a field from the status table. And the field I'm going to use from the ticket table, if we double click to open it up, is this ID field just here. Remember, this is a unique field and it identifies each record in the table. Now, I can't go back and call this ID because we already have an ID field in this particular table. So I'm going to call this ticket ID. And the ticket ID is a number, effectively. Let's give it a description. Unique ID, primary key of the ticket table. Now I need to adjust the properties here. So field size, we've got long integer, and I'm going to leave it on that because ticket numbers can get quite long. Is it required? Let's say yes. Is it indexed? Yes. And then the final field that we're going to add to this table is the only field that we have in the status table, which is the status field. Now this is a short text field, and this is unique ID, the primary key of the status table. So let's modify the field properties. I'm going to take this down to 50. Yes, it's required. We're not going to allow zero length, and yes, it's indexed. So now if we right click and switch to Datasheet view, we can see those 3 new columns that we have in there. So now we have our 3 tables, we need to link them together. So let's close this table down and go back to our relationships window. If you recall, we added these 2 tables last time, but now we have an additional table that we need to add. So let's jump over to the right-hand side. We're going to select Table Ticket Status and add selected tables. And the way that I like to position these is I like to have my link table in the middle so that it's really clear. So I'm going to position mine like that. So now we can start to link the tables together by their common fields. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to link Table Ticket to Table Ticket Status. And the field we're going to use to link is the ID field in Table Ticket because that's a unique field, and we're going to link it to the ticket ID. If you recall, the ticket ID field in Table Ticket Status is actually the ID field from Table Ticket. We just couldn't call it ID because we already had the ID field in this table. So we're going to click on the field, and to link, we just simply drag and drop it onto the field that we want to link it to. Now it's going to pop open this Edit Relationships window, and you just want to double check to make sure that you're linking between the correct tables and fields. So I can see here I'm linking the ID field in Table Ticket to the ticket ID field in Table Ticket Status. And this is a one-to-many relationship, which basically means in this scenario where we're linking to Table Ticket Status is that one ID could have many different statuses. The other thing we do want to make sure we do here is enforce referential integrity. And what that basically means is that if we were to, for example, delete a record that's linked to many other records, it will delete all of the linked records as well so that we don't have any orphaned links. So I'm happy with those settings. Let's click on Create. And you can see it creates a link between these 2 tables using those 2 fields. We have a 1 at one end and the infinity symbol at the other. And this really represents the one-to-many link that we have in here. If you want to go back in and make any changes, you can simply double click on that line to reopen that Edit Relationships window. So now we just want to do exactly the same thing, but this time we're going to link the status field in Table Status to the status field in Table Ticket Status. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to drag the fields and drop. Once again, we want to check to make sure we have the correct fields link. It's a one-to-many relationship. We want to enforce referential integrity and click on Create. So now we have those tables linked together via a link table that uses a field from each in the middle. So following on from the last lesson where we created ourselves a link table, we're going to create another table to hold some more information and another link table, just so you can see how this works when you have multiple different tables. So let's take a look at Table Ticket. I'm just going to open it up. Now, notice that one of the columns of information that we have in our main fact table is the location. Now maybe I want a separate table that houses the region information, so basically which continent these different cities are located in. So we're going to create another table, we're going to call it region, and then we're going to link it to our main fact table using a link table again. So let's close both of these windows down. We're going to jump up to create, and we're going to choose table design first of all, because this is going to be our region table. And much like the last one, it's only going to have one field, and that field is called region. The data type is going to be short text. This is the primary key field of this table, and let's give it a description. Now I'm going to change the field size, so let's make this 70. Is it required? Yes. Allow zero length? No. Is it indexed? Yes. Now, when I try and switch to Datasheet view, it's going to ask me to save the table, and we're going to call this Table Region, and click on OK. So now I can add the different regions in. And you will find a file called region.xlsx in the course files folder so that you know what to type in. And there we go. I'm going to click on save just to save this table, and I'm going to close this table down, and we're going to jump back into our relationships window. Once again, we need to add our new table from the Add Tables window on the right hand side. So let's select Table Region and add selected tables. Now, once again, this is just kind of out there all on its own. It's not currently linked to anything. Remember, these are our dimension tables that we're linking to our main fact table. Now, do I have a common field between Table Ticket and Table Region? Well, no, I don't. So once again, I need to create a link table, much like we did previously, in order to be able to link this all together. So let's close down Relationships. I'm going to save the layout, and we're going to create ourselves a new table. Now let's switch into Design View, and this one we're going to call Table Ticket Region, because we're linking the ticket table and the region table. Once again, we have our primary key, our unique ID for this specific table. So let's give it a description. Our next field again is going to be ticket ID, exactly the same as what it was in our last link table. This is a number, and this is the unique ID of the ticket table. And then the final field that we need in here is region. This is a short text field, and this is the unique ID of the region table. Now let's just check our field properties for ticket ID. That's long integer, required yes, indexed yes. And for region, I'm going to take this down to, let's say 70, required yes, allow zero length no, indexed yes. So now that we have our link table, let's close it down and save the changes and jump back to our relationships window. We can now add Table Ticket Region to our diagram, and I'm going to drag it over here and sort of place it in between. And you can really arrange these how you like. I'm just going to put mine like that. And once again, we're going to link Table Ticket to Table Ticket Region using the ID column. Because remember, the ticket ID field in Table Ticket Region is actually the ID field from Table Ticket. So let's drag and drop it down here. Let's check to make sure that our tables and fields are correct, which they are. It's a one-to-many relationship, and I'm going to enforce referential integrity. So now I've created that link. We're going to do exactly the same for the region field. Let's drag and drop it across. Once again, enforce referential integrity, one-to-many relationship, and click on Create. So effectively what I'm doing here as I'm adding in these different tables and link tables is I'm really extending the amount of information that we have access to, the amount of information we can query, the amount of information we can interrogate. With these two tables, I've now managed to add in some additional information about the status of each ticket and also the region that the ticket belongs to. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, wouldn't it just be easier to add those columns into the main table instead of doing all of this? So if I open up Toolbar Ticket, you might think, okay, well, why can't we just add a status column and a region column and select from here? Well, yes, you could definitely do that. But one advantage of having certain pieces of information in other tables is that it's much quicker when it comes to things like indexing and searching. If you imagine, if I had a status column in here and we had 100,000 records, every time I wanted to search for closed calls, it's going to have to churn through 100,000 records to pull out that information, which can be quite slow. Whereas if we have that information in its own little table over here, it only has to churn through a few records because of the way everything's linked together. So it makes your database a lot more efficient and a lot quicker. So now we have quite a few different tables in our database. We've got our main fact table, and then we have a couple of dimension tables that are linked to the fact table via linked tables. Now, if we just close down this relationships pane and double click to open up Toolbar Ticket Region. Now notice here we have these three columns. We have ID, Ticket ID, and Region. And we need to complete information for each of our records. So wherever we have a ticket number in Toolbar Ticket, we need to have some region information for those records. So for example, if we take a look at the first record here, it has an ID of 1. We can see the ticket number, the customer is Ben Lee, and the location is London. So in the Toolbar Ticket Region table, this needs to be ID number 1, and the region needs to be Europe. Now, if I have to do one of these for each of the records that we have in the Toolbar Ticket table, that's going to be pretty difficult to do. I'm going to have to keep switching back to Toolbar Ticket to work out which record belongs to which location so that I can then add the region. So we're going to make this a little bit easier on ourselves, and I'm going to show you a couple of little tricks that you can use to make this process a little bit easier. So let's first close down Toolbar Ticket. And the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to create ourselves a little drop-down list using the Lookup wizard, much like we did last time, so that we can easily select the region from a drop-down list of items. So what we're going to do here is we're going to right-click and switch back into Design View. Now currently the region field, the data type is short text, and we need to change this to Lookup wizard. But check out what happens if we try to do that. It's telling us that we can't change the data type for this field because it's part of one or more relationships. If we want to change the data type, we need to delete the relationships first. So that would be correct. This table is linked to other tables, and this field specifically is linked to other fields in other tables. So we need to jump back into relationships, and we basically need to delete these relationships that we have which are using this region field. So let's click on the first relationship. I'm going to just press the delete key to get rid of those, and we're also going to delete this relationship as well. So now that we've done that, we can close this window down. Let's go back to Toolbar Ticket Region. Let's switch into Design View, and now we should be able to change this to Lookup Wizard. Now, if you recall, we did use this Lookup Wizard before when we were creating other drop-down lists. And in those examples previously, we always chose this option here, type in the values that you want. Now this time, because we have a region table that lists out the regions, we're going to just reference the table as opposed to having to type those values in ourselves. So let's choose the first option. I want the lookup field to get the values from another table or query. So let's click on Next, and our values are located in Toolbar region. So let's select it, click on Next. We only have one field in Toolbar region, so we need to make sure that we have it selected and click on the right facing arrow to move that across. Click on Next, And now we can choose if we want to sort those. So if you want them in alphabetical order by region, you can do that. So let's do that. I'm going to say region, and I'm going to sort in ascending order. Let's click on Next. And you can see a little preview of how that looks. So we have those regions from the Toolbar region table, and they're sorted alphabetically A to Z. So this looks pretty good. I'm going to click on Next again. I'm happy to leave my lookup field label as region. I'm going to enable data integrity, and I'm going to restrict delete. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later on. Let's not get too sidetracked right now. I'm just going to click on Finish. It's prompted me to save, so I'm going to say yes. Let's save now. And what you'll notice is that if we jump back into relationships, it's recreated that relationship between Toolbar ticket region and Toolbar region for me based off of that lookup field that I just created. So now if we close this window down and switch back into Datasheet view, if I click in the region field, I can now see all of those regions and I can select them from the list. However, we still have that little problem where it's quite difficult for me to see which region the first ticket relates to without constantly switching over to Toolbar ticket. So what would be really helpful for me here is that when I click in ticket ID, it pops up some useful information that's going to help me know which region I need to assign to this ticket. For example, maybe when I click over here, I want it to pop up the ticket ID, the customer name, and the city. So let's switch back into design view. We're going to click in ticket ID, and we're going to change the data type to Lookup Wizard. We're going to use a table for our lookup field. Now all of the information that I want to see, so for example the ticket ID, the customer name, and the city, all three of those fields are located within Toolbar ticket. So I'm going to select Toolbar ticket and click on Next, and now I can choose the fields that are going to help me know which region to select. And you can choose anything in here. I'm going to go for ticket number, I'm going to go for customer, and location. I'm going to move all of those over to the selected fields area. Let's click on Next. I'm going to sort these by ID in ascending order. Let's click on Next, and now you can see that information that's going to pop up when I click in this field. So this information is going to appear in a little preview window, which is really going to help me when it comes to selecting which region these tickets belong to. So let's click on Next again. I'm going to leave the lookup field name on ticket ID. Let's enable data integrity and restrict delete, and click on Finish. I'm going to save, yes I am. And once again, if we go back to our relationships window, you can see it's re-added in that connection between these two tables based off of that lookup field. So now if we jump back to Datasheet view, and if I click in ticket ID, check out all of the information that I get just here. So I can see here that that first ticket is for Ben Lee, and he's located in London. So when I select this ticket, I know that the region needs to be Europe. If I go to the second ticket, I can see that that ticket is for Deb Ashby, and she's located in Paris. So once again, the region needs to be Europe, and I can carry on going through. Jeffrey Harris is also London, so that's going to be Europe. And let's just do one more. Salvatore Barrett is Hong Kong, so that region is going to be Asia. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to complete the rest of these for all of the remaining tickets. So now I have all of those in there. I'm going to need to do a similar thing for Toolbar ticket status. So let's close down this table and let's open up Toolbar ticket status, because we have a similar situation just here. I need to complete the status for each of the tickets. So if we open up Toolbar ticket, I need to specify which calls are on hold, which ones are closed, which ones are active, so on and so forth. So once again, it's going to be quite difficult for me to do that without having that additional information. So let's quickly run through exactly the same thing, because practice does make perfect. Now the first thing I'm going to do is close down Toolbar ticket. Let's right click and go into design view, and we're going to change the status field to Lookup Wizard Once again, we're getting that message. We need to delete the relationship first of all. So database tools, relationships. I am going to go through this a little bit quicker as it's the second run through. And we're going to delete anything that links to the status field. Now it's telling me that this is open. I need to close the table down first of all. And now I should be able to delete that link. And we'll delete this one as well. Perfect. Let's close down relationships and save. I'm going to open up Tibble Ticket Status again, and we're going to switch to Design View. So now we've deleted those relationships, we should be able to select Lookup Wizard, which we can. I'm going to grab the status field from a table because we added them into Tibble Status. Let's click on Next. We're going to choose Tibble Status and Next. We only have one field in there, so let's add that to our selected fields. Do I want to sort them? I'm not going to bother in this instance. Let's just click on Next. Those are my different statuses. Let's click on Next again and enable data integrity. Finish. I'm going to save the table, and that will effectively create the relationship between Tibble Status and Tibble Ticket Status. Now that we have that, we need to add in our little helper information. So once again, this time I'm going to add in a lookup, which shows me the ticket ID, the customer name, and let's also say priority. So we're going to flip into Design View, click in Ticket ID. We're going to go to Lookup Wizard. We're going to use a table because all of these fields are in Tibble Ticket. So this time, to help me out, I'm going to have the ticket number. Let's have the customer, and let's have the priority. Why not? Click on Next. I'm going to sort these in order of sending ID. There is a little preview as to what that's going to look like. I'm going to click on Finish and Save. Let's just check to make sure it's created that relationship for us, which it has. And now if we go back into Datasheet view, once again, if we click in the drop down, it's going to show me the ticket ID, the customer, and the priority. So I'm going to select Ben Lee, and the status for his call is, let's say, active. I would then go to the next person in the list. The status for this call is closed. Let's go to the next one, so on and so forth. I think you get the idea. But you can see how useful this is when it comes to completing information in your table. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to, once again, update all of these records with a relevant status. It's time now for us to complete exercise 6. And in this exercise, we're going to practice some of the skills that we've learned in this section of the course. So the first thing I'd like you to do here is to create a new table and name it Tibble Customers. And I'd like you to use the Table Design button to do this. I'd then like you to add the following two fields to the table, customer name and customer number. And make sure you use the data types, descriptions, and properties laid out in this screenshot. I'd like you to set the customer name field as the primary key for the table. And then I'd like you to import the records from customerlist.xlsx into Tibble Customers. And you'll find that file in the exercise files folder. Once we've imported those records, I'd like you to go in and create a one-to-many relationship between the customer name field in Tibble Orders and the customer name field in Tibble Customers. And make sure that you enforce referential integrity. So that's it for this exercise. If you'd like to see my answer, then please keep watching. So the first thing I asked you to do here was to create a new table and use the Table Design button. And we're going to add our two fields, which are customer name. This is a short text field. And the second field, customer number. And this is a short text field. Let's add our description. And then we can set our properties. So let's go for customer name. Field size, let's make that 40. Required, yes. Zero length, no. Indexed, yes. Customer number, let's make that 50. Required, yes. Zero length, no. Indexed, yes. And I asked you to make the customer name field the primary key for this table. Let's right click and save. We're going to give our table a name of Tooble Customers. So now that we have our new table, if we switch across to Datasheet view, we don't have any records as yet. So the next part of this exercise was to import some records from the Excel file customer list. So let's close down our table. Yes, to save the changes. Up to external data. So let's go to new data source, from file, Excel, and then we can browse for the file that we want to import. So this is the customer list. There it is. Click on open, and we're going to append a copy to the table Tooble Customers. Let's click on OK and work through the wizard. So that all looks pretty good. Let's move on to next, next, importing to Tooble Customers. Let's click on finish, and we don't need to save the import steps. So now if we double click just to check those have come across fine, I can see all of my customer names and all of those customer numbers. The final thing to do in this exercise was to create a relationship between Tooble orders and Tooble customers. So let's jump up to Database Tools, into Relationships, and we're going to add both of these tables. So let's select them both, Add Selected Tables. Now I'm going to rearrange these slightly. Let's drag the bottom down so we can see all of those fields. And now we can create a link between these two tables using the common field. And that common field is the customer name field. So I'm going to drag customer name from Tooble Customers and drop it on top of customer name in Tooble Orders. You can see the relationship type is one-to-many, and we want to enforce referential integrity. Let's click on Create. And there we go, we are done.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To get the course exercise files and follow along with this video, click over there. And click over there to watch more videos on YouTube from Simon Sez IT.